Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy Thursday. Thanks for joining. I'm really excited about today's conversation. But first off, a few housekeeping. If you're on here, hit that like button, share this with anybody, or tag somebody on this discussion that you think may find it interesting. Also, to show support to the show, you can find me on CASHAPP or VENMO, Chez, Chardé. As always, I will be sure to acknowledge super chats, CASHAPPs, VENMO, all that jazz. So I'm excited about today's topic. So I wanted to kind of give you guys a bit of a backstory as to how we came to this point. Over the last week or two, this whole topic of Black men's best interest, I think, has been somewhat of a buzz term, something that's been going on online. And I really feel like it kind of came out of this whole discussion that we had a few weeks ago, that I had a few weeks ago with the lovely Miss I.M. Courtney Michelle, where we were discussing, STAB and that whole concept, which caused quite a bit of controversy. But nevertheless, I think it really brought to the surface this topic of Black men's best interest. What is their best interest? How to move in their best interest? Should they not? All of that. So, while that's been going on over the last week or so, I've seen different, videos, different debates, different back and forth around this whole topic of Black men's best interest. I thought, why not actually ask Black men what their best interest is? And, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that the Dr. Hasan Johnson had put together a political agenda, essentially, that broke down the different interests and the different concerns that Black men had, and, verbalized it. And so I thought this was a great way to really start to understand more of not only what's, just going on in the relational realm, but essentially what are the interests of Black men politically? What are their interests? What are the things that are impacting them, or negatively impacting them every single day? Because I think when we talk about relationships as women, as someone who will be called a so-called pick-me, whatever it may be, I think one of the ways that we can engage with men, or one of the ways that we can win them back, whatever that may be, is to actually understand what their interests are. Is to understand, what are they going through? What are they thinking about? What's on their mind? Like, to actually study the men that you're in relationship with. And I think we don't necessarily do that enough. We're not encouraged to do that enough. You know, in a live I had a few weeks ago in my How to Be a Wife series, one of the women there who'd been married almost 30 years was like, yeah, study your husband, study your man. This was some advice she was giving us ladies. I think older white woman who's been married, has like 11 kids, you know, great wisdom. But yeah, this whole idea of like studying your man came up. And I was like, this is exactly what I think women need to do, especially if there is a desire for us to want to learn how to get along with men in the Black community, or to want to just engage in a man relationally, or understand them more, understand, you know, sons more, fathers more, uncles, whatever. I don't think there's enough emphasis trying to understand the other side. So this was one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation. And of course, bring on talking to Hasan Johnson, who this is his profession. So it's not just like my opinion or my feelings, but we have someone who actually studies this professionally. So I'm really excited to have him on and have this discussion. So without further ado, I'm gonna bring him on. And also, guys, again, be sure to hit the like button and show support to the show. If you like this, if this resonates with you, support your favorite content creators, and be sure to pass this along to any guys and ladies out there who you think may find this helpful. So I'm gonna bring them on, and then we'll get going. Hello, hello.
Hey, how you doing?
I am good. Again, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you. I know you have a very busy schedule, so thank you for taking the time to hang out
Oh,
and
no.
discuss this whole thing.
Oh, I appreciate it. It's yeah, it's I'm a little tired. I've been sitting in here teaching since 9:30 in the morning, so
Ooh,
so I'm a
yeah.
little wired, but yeah, glad to have the conversation. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, as I mentioned before, this was kind of, at least for me, the interest was born out of this whole talk around, it really centered around relationships, but this whole idea of Black men's best interest. And of course, there's always going to be some, it's always going to be debate around that. But
Yeah.
I will say, you know, I posed a question to my community a few days ago. I just asked them, hey, how can women support Black men practically? I was curious to see the response, and I want to read to you some of the different things that members said and then ask you a question, because it was, I mean, I wasn't surprised, but I was actually surprised
Okay.
if that makes sense, at some of the different things that were said. So I'm gonna bring it up real quick. Actually, maybe I'll just share it. I don't know if that'd be easy. Maybe I'll just share it
Okay.
really quickly. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, because like I said, it can be really easy sometimes to talk about people, but I'm like, sometimes I think it's good to actually talk to them and figure out what
I'm
it is that
tripping
they're
off.
going.
I'm tripping off your chat. They got me in here rolling.
Oh, really?
Blasphemy 50 has got me dying.
Okay, so really quick, so I asked them, and I saw people who were just like, "Yay, thank you, thank you, thank you." Not necessarily a response, but just thank you. Um, and now I saw here, yes, of course, healthy in-group preservation and advocacy, um, counter strategies. I'm like, okay. Yeah, he talks about change is coming. So I saw a lot of people just being like, great, thanks for asking.
Mhm.
Which I'm like, okay, that's great, but like, what do you actually want? Um, yeah, I see here, better to be picked than passed by. Now, here's one that was interesting to me. It said, health. Stress is killing us, and we get plenty everywhere from everyone else, but yours is the only stress that matters. So, you know, again, relationships. This is in response to my question, how to support Black men practically. So I
Mm.
saw, you know, a few in there again who were like, this is great. Just thanks for asking. Now, here's one he kind of wanted to detail, talked about health. I was like, okay, that's valid.
Mhm.
What about supporting Black women and girls? I'm like, this isn't about supporting Black women and girls. I don't know if that person was trolling, if it was a legitimate conversation.
Every time the conversation comes up, that's when I hear it at conferences. Yeah, yeah.
Literally, I'm like, we could talk about that, but it's not about that this very moment. So I thought that was interesting. Um, Now here's another one I thought was interesting. It says the best thing you can do for a man is be a woman, and all
Mm.
that entails. Show me this nurturing they love to claim so adamantly. You know, and then I saw another one, oh, you're amazing, you're great. Which I'm like, thanks, but what do you actually want? Like, people go back to, what do you want? It says, count me in. So now here's interesting one that says, you know, accusations, felony crimes, family court system needs to be redone. So here's where I'm actually seeing some stuff talk about like institutional real things, which I thought was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. Then you hear some more. Oh, I agree. This is great. I agree. This is great. Um, and then here it talks about, okay, if you're talking truly advocating for Black men, that should start with Black men leading their own movement. So another person again talking about, well, if we should support you, you should be supporting yourself. I'm like, okay. And then I saw, listening is good support. I saw another one that was like, just being a woman is good support. A lot of praise, a lot of support. So the interesting thing about it, I wanted to bring this up because I asked a pretty specific question, right? Where I was like, how can we support you practically? And I heard a lot of like, yay, thank you for support. Like I heard that, but I don't really feel like I got a ton of responses. And then apart from a handful that maybe spoke to real institutional things, the majority of the stuff that I felt like I saw was just, can you just be nice? Can you just be feminine? But I was like, I'm serious.
I mean, and I wouldn't downplay that. The Black men are suckers for niceness because it's not something we're used to. But no, I think what you're showing is really, is really an issue. Most Black men can't articulate that. And it's because it's not something if you really look at, the dynamic where we're talking about Black women not knowing how to prioritize men, we're socialized in the same family households that prioritize mothers and women and so on and so forth. These gynocentric kind of households, we're socialized in the same environments. So we learn from our mothers the way our sisters learn from our mothers that they are the priority. And so the smallest modicum of kindness for most Black men goes a lot further than it probably would for other groups. It doesn't take as much. This is one of the reasons why women, from other countries are quick to say Black men don't require as much. Definitely don't require as much as our men do. Well, we've never learned how to require much from women. So the smallest amount, it goes a long way, and we're not ready. This is, I told you this before we came in. I'm having the same kind of issues as I'm trying to get Black men to think about their own interests politically. We don't know how to do it. Most Black men, when you ask them about what it is we need, we start talking about Black community in a very kind of communal sense. We talk about Blackness. We talk about what benefits the family, but none of it is very much directed. Maybe boys, like that might be as far as it goes, but we don't know how to really think about ourselves. We've not been trained to do that.
Okay. Very interesting. Yeah. So, because that was going to be my question. I was like, based upon what I saw, it was like they weren't really asking for much. They literally weren't like I didn't really see anything unreasonable. Like I said, there are a few who spoke to legitimate institutional concerns, but I didn't see anything really crazy. I think I saw one that was like, "Can you just leave us alone?" Like, leave us alone? But it was literally like the bare minimum, and that's why I was just like, I walked away from that being like, why are Black men asking for so little?
Mm-hmm. You're asking what kind of feast they want. They're asking you for glasses of water. That's essentially what's going on, and that should tell you how deprived many are in families and relationships. You'd be surprised, and it's something that isn't new, but it is what it is, and this is one of the reasons why. Over the last few decades, Black men have been, some individual Black men have been making adjustments to where they're finding their relationships because, you have individuals that always break through here and there and they're saying, look, we can actually have a full plate over here or over there. And it's not something we're used to. If anything, it makes some of us uncomfortable. Look, I'm the child of a Panther. I was raised in this kind of nationalist context. Mm-hmm. I've dated out before, but truth be told, that's not really part of my thought process. It just doesn't feel right. But then again, at the end of the day, when I look at other, situations socially, even on a macro level, I see a kind of bond going on between men and women in other communities that I don't recognize. You know what I mean? And so, this is something I talked about in my show last night. We were talking about policy in relation to Title IV, Title VII. We talked about the man in the house rule. And at the end of the day, what we were really talking about is how other groups have been able to work in tandem between men and women politically to advance their own families. For us, it's forced internal competition and isolation in many ways, and men find themselves isolated more than any other group I can really think of. Black men in particular, isolated from family, isolated from kids, isolated politically, isolated, socially. They're, in many ways a pariah as far as law enforcement is concerned. Even if you haven't done anything, all of these kind of things begin to add up, and this kind of isolation is reaching a fever pitch where Black men are starting to shake the tree to see what else they can get and where they can get it from.
Very interesting. So you're saying you feel like you're starting to see, Black men get used to the idea of asking for particular things, but it's a bit of a slow process. It's a bit of a almost having to probably relearn or rethink or shift paradigm to a certain extent.
It's definitely shift paradigm. To relearn would suggest we learned it in the first place. But, because on top of not learning how to do it, we were told that we were selfish. We were told that we were oppressive. We were told that we were patriarchal and this, and so you're talking about people who haven't fundamentally eaten, but then we were told we absorbed the majority of the feast and left everybody else starving. So it's a really awkward kind of dynamic with Black men who are, being gaslit on one end, but never having found a kind of supportive structure on another, especially if you're, if you're Gen X and younger, it really kind of comes into a whole nother fold. So it's an awkward situation, and Black men are looking to find alternative means. And this is the first time during my lifetime I've seen Black men begin to speak up the way they are. And it's not only making other people uncomfortable, other groups, other demographics, most particularly Black women, it's also making other Black men uncomfortable. Because it goes
that's another thing I wanted to ask you, but because so you make some really good points. As I read through the policy, and I think I have a few questions that are directed to some particular points. But I was reading through the policy, and I noticed, there were certain things where it's like, that were essentially trying to deal with some of the issues with unemployment, some of the issues with homelessness, issues with incarceration, all of that. And what I've observed, now correct me if I'm wrong, I do not pretend to be an expert, in the male issues or the manosphere or none of that. But what I have heard from or observed from different content creators I've spoken with who are in the manosphere or closely associated with it, is like, there's very much this, pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality and just figure it out and make the best of the system. But with that, I also feel like I've heard somewhat of a almost, I don't want to say a disregard, but not necessarily a willingness to want to engage in different programs or governmental support, because then that would be seen as, in some ways, feeding into bad behavior or feeding into laziness. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, I've heard this especially with men, complaining about welfare, things of that nature. But even when it comes to men who face homelessness or men who face poverty, from what I've observed, it's very much just like, well, man up and figure it out. So when I was looking through some of the different policies, I was thinking, like, I wonder if there are men out here who would look at this and say, this is coddling. Men who fall on this, it's essentially their fault. They need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, be a man, and figure it out like the rest of us.
Oh yeah, there are definitely people, Black men and Black women, that would feel that way. The irony to that is every group that we compare ourselves to, ends up having government support when you look at them historically. Nobody doesn't, and especially nobody that's doing well. And if they don't have direct federal or state support, they have international support. So we have this strange habit of comparing ourselves to groups that actually have the very support we don't think that we need. And yet we're one of the poorest demographics out here in terms of the Black community, right? With no inherited wealth. So it's one of those kind of things where it's counterintuitive, and we're kind of working with standards that are really superhuman in some respects. And it doesn't leave us very much room to breathe because it's not realistic. But on the other end of the spectrum, yeah, you're definitely right. There are those that would say, you don't need government, so on and so forth. But here's the thing. The issue with that is that the distrust that Black men have of being able to rely on any kind of institution is not come to in isolation. It's not something that Black men just woke up and decided arbitrarily. Part of it comes out of the fact that we've never really had that type of support. I mean, even when we're talking about leading up to the development of affirmative action, where Black men were on the docket to get support, we were quickly switched out for white women. And in that new hierarchy, where usually the hierarchy was white men, you know what I mean? And then it kind of went down from there. It flipped after the affirmative action kind of narrative, and it became white women, then Black women, and then maybe some Black men would benefit from some type of affirmative action. So we've never enjoyed any type of structural support. We're not used to it. If anything, we've been vilified. And here's the other thing. When Black men are trying to date and or marry women, most particularly Black women, each individual man has to pretty much compete with the United States government in terms of being able to provide a woman with security. That's what you have to do. You have to compete essentially with the United States government. Some men can do it. If you make over six figures, you represent more than like a little around 4% of the Black community if you're over six figures. And yet that's a number we throw around a lot, But if you don't make that, she can replace you. And if she doesn't like what the lifestyle that you're trying to provide, she can take you to court. She can leave you and either find somebody else or rely on government. So we come to these kinds of perspectives about institutions out of a history of never having been supported by them in any substantive way. So there's an inbred kind of distrust. And this is one of the tensions with Black women. Black women come at government support with a very different attitude because it's a very entitled sense. They're used to it. When you're used to a safety net and you're dealing with someone that isn't. And I can't tell you even on a personal level how many relationships I've had with women who go out, who go into ventures with a sense that they can fail because there's something that will prevent them from hitting rock bottom. Whereas for me, I know there isn't. You know what I mean? And this has led to a lot of different tensions about, things that you wouldn't think have any realistic basis, like where we're going to travel to or what business ventures we'll get in or which projects we should apply for. You'd be surprised how many subtleties are there as far as her sense that all will be well, because if it doesn't work out for her, somebody will save her, be it an institution or a person or me. Whereas for me, nobody's coming for me. Nobody's coming. I'm not expecting anybody, and more than likely, nobody is. So that produces a whole different worldview. And so when you say to Black men, look, we should be talking about institutional support. We should be talking about exploit. Yeah, if part of it, you're going to get the traditional masculine narrative we get in the West, which is the rugged individualist. But a part of it is unique to Black men in that we've never had it. We've never been able to rely on it. And hell, if you did try to get government support on anything, yeah, you were labeled lazy or labeled, all these things. And these would be by the institutions themselves. You know what I mean? So it definitely has a history. It doesn't come out of nowhere. And it's something you have to remember when you're engaging Black men. They don't have a support network. Never have.
Okay. So with that, then it would make sense as to why, as I mentioned earlier, a natural response to something that you presented might be opposition, because it kind of goes against how many have been trained and what many have experienced. And so they're kind of used to not having support. So to operate with support seems a bit foreign.
I mean, hell, even requests for reparations are seen that way by some. Where it's like, why are you asking for that? We're never going to get it. Forget it. Just go do it on your own. Make yourself a millionaire. I mean, these kinds of narratives. It comes out of being excluded from society, and this is essentially what Black men are grappling with. We've been excluded, institutionally, politically, and socially, even within families, for so long that many of us don't really know another reality. So it's difficult to have a conversation about how we can be included when it's not something you've experienced. And I'm trying to help initiate that conversation, but I haven't been included either. I mean, I've been a black sheep my whole life. It is what it is. You know what I mean? It's I'm not trying to paint a picture of victimization. I'm just simply saying Black men are not used to being included.
Real quick, shout out to Better You for the 5 on the super chat. Thank you. I appreciate the support. It says hello to both of you. I read the agenda earlier today. Great. And thank you also. Wrench Turner presents with the 10 on the super chat. I see on the word for the good doc. Thank both of you guys for your support. Again, if you like what's going on here, you enjoy everything, you can show support on our video. Also, super chats, as always, I will be sure to acknowledge. And I'm having a conversation with Dr. Hasan Johnson about just how to support Black men practically. And he was just bringing me up to speed on some of the different pushback, believe it or not, he has gotten from Black women and Black men on this whole topic. So again, be sure to hit the like button. Likes are free and show support to the show if this kind of information resonates with you and you think it is positive. Okay, so I know you mentioned that you said that you were the black sheep, Dr. Hasan Johnson, and I was, I as someone who has, a dad who's worked in, my dad's worked in education since his earliest years, and I just was thinking, man, like as a dark skinned Black man with locks, like you know what I mean, talking about Black male issues, I know it's not been an easy road for you because I even know for my dad, he doesn't have locks necessarily, but it's like dark-skinned Black man, it doesn't, there's really no way, shape, or form. I mean, I know you can kind of learn how to, in certain areas, you kind of have to learn how to code switch. And I've always noticed, Black men who are in certain positions of power or influence, how they have to try to present themselves as non-threatening, especially the darker they are, or the taller they are, or the more masculine, for however you put it, they may appear, right? However you look into that. I've always noticed that certain phenotypes of Black men usually have to try to appear non-threatening, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm wrong on that. That's just something that I feel like
you're definitely right. And if you don't play that game, if you don't choose to, or if you're unable to, there are social punishments kind of built in where there's certain doors that don't open for you. You kind of understand that every now and again, a few of us slip through the cracks that really aren't supposed to be there. And, there's an awkwardness of what to do with us. And, but that's how it is. It's just the system. And for the most part, Black men understand the dynamic. Whether we choose to play the game or not, we understand it. We understand what's required, whether we follow through or we don't. I've never been one to really go out my way to make people comfortable, but I'm not like, I'm not one to cuss you out in general. That's just not really my nature, but none of that really matters. People will fear you. This is something you learn coming into your teens. People will fear you just because. I mean, my son is 6'10". He's got a size 20 shoe. He's got locks, nicest kid you'll ever want to meet. If you just see him walking down the street, you really don't know much about Black folk. You're probably going to be terrified of him, and so that is what it is.
Yeah, I've noticed that for my, my husband, and even, his family comes from a very tall, all very tall, dark skin. And it's like in my experience, it's like a lot of the men in the family are very, presentable, like very non-threatening. But I can just say something as simple as like when the experiences that I've had with him versus not, and the conversations we have about that, like it is different. And it's so crazy because even as, obviously Black people in America, we have a certain experience that is shared. And yet there are so many experiences that I think just are not shared, that we'll never really fully understand as like a woman. And even as a woman that presents a certain way that may have particular phenotypes or may have particular features, like there's always going to be a way that I'm perceived differently than my husband or or my father or different men in my family. And I think sometimes for certain women, it's hard to understand that because you can just look at the feminist ideology or look at the whole women's rights things and just assume that you're more oppressed than men automatically just by reason of deduction, and not really fully understanding the way the system specifically operates against men and why.
Yeah.
So,
and a lot of that's intersectionality, really, as it was introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. The idea was that Black women are, oppressed in terms of race, class, sex, and gender. Black men experienced all those oppressions too, except that we were supposed to be privileged by gender. Later, what others found empirically is that we were actually hyper attacked because of gender. White men didn't love us because we were men. They hated us that much more because we were men. But, that's the split. But what you ended up having via intersectionality is many women come to the table like, well, we're all Black in terms of Black men and women. So I already understand what Black men go through. I'm a little bit more oppressed because I'm a woman, but because I understand the Black thing, there's really nothing that I don't know about what Black men go through. And so when Black men have a different response, to situations, much of the time you'll hear a kind of frustration or tension, where some women will go out their way to call Black men cowards, to denigrate Black men who do not respond the same way they do to situations, opportunities, environments, even work environments. And a lot of that is because of a misunderstanding of the way gender and race work. I mean, the understanding they have, especially as they've been trained in gender studies, is that, through the Black experience, they already get all of that. Plus, they have this extra area of being Black women. But, the whole Black man thing is really misunderstood, even within the academy. And a lot of brothers can't articulate it. So, there's really just kind of an unspoken distance where some brothers are just getting tired. They're walking away. But, that's the missing piece in the dialogue. And a lot of sisters don't want to hear it because they've grown kind of comfortable with this rampant space of being hyper oppressed via intersectionality. And to give that in and actually have to accept that you don't know everything about the community and that your men are actually targeted in a way that you don't want to accept. The only groups that I've run across really of Black women that get that are women who have intimately close relationships with men that they respect and value, like daughters, fathers, or most particularly mothers of sons. Those tend to be the women that approach me most to say, either understand this or can you help me understand it, because I know something here is different.
It's off.
It's off. Yes. And that's where I notice the difference. But when you get around women who don't have any of those kind of connections, it's a very kind of flippant, hey, we're all Black, I get racism, what is he complaining about kind of attitude. And that produces even more distance.
No, I mean, so much to impact there. Shout out to the Crimson Cure. It's so good to see you here. It says good evening, Shay, in panel and chat. Shout out to you, Vincent Lindsay, for the $1.99 in the super chat. I see tuition for Dr. Truth. Shout out to Haru, the $4.99. I see P. Shay and Dr. T. And Ventus, I hope I don't butcher your name, says, where's BGS on this panel to complete the trinity of my favorite Black academics in the space? If he was here, I'd love him to come up.
He's in the chat.
Oh, is he?
I saw him drop a word. He's in the chat.
Oh, is he? Yeah. If you're here, feel free to join. I'll drop I'll drop the link for BGS if you are interested. Absolutely no pressure, but y'all, this will be for him only. But yeah, no, that's, I think that's one of the things to me that really drew me to your content, Dr. T. Hasan, because it was unlike anything I had heard before, especially in the academic space. And all I can say is, like, I think there was one live where I heard you say one of your initial classes, one of the first classes you had, or earlier classes you had, you noticed that it was predominantly non-Black women who were going in there studying Black men.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mentioned that on a panel with Obsidian and Kevin Samuels.
Okay.
And I didn't know where that was going to go. Next thing I know, people were calling me because Kevin was saying it on some other show. But that went through stages. So I've been teaching now for about 24 years, and I came to Fresno State about 14 years ago. And I started teaching a Black male course because it was needed. I'm looking at these young brothers who were getting accepted, and a lot of them were, dropping out. A lot of them really didn't have any support structure on how to navigate college. They were having, even the conversations I was listening to in the hallways, I was like, okay, if I don't grab some of these young men, they're not only going to be out of here, they might even be arbitrarily locked up behind things that some of them don't understand. So I created this class alongside a student group for Black males, and began to implement that. And early on, what I found was I had more Black women than men, which, numerically is no surprise. That tends to be the case anyway, as far as the enrollment in school. But I started to get fewer and fewer men and more women, because my initial training in my doctorate was as a feminist. I hadn't dealt with gender prior to my doctorate. So one of my primary mentors was ex-Black Panther. She was a feminist. And so I came in with that framework. The only way I knew how to deal with gender was through kind of what she taught me. So I'm teaching this Black male class using this approach I got in grad school, and I'm watching the numbers of Black males dwindle. I'm seeing the Black males in my class looking at the ground, just kind of disconnected. And I'm seeing the women more and more excited. And what I realized was that it was becoming a class where the young ladies were using me to finger wag at the men on the campus to kind of nudge them to do what they wanted them to do. So when I started to actually ask the men what their perspectives were, and I started to kind of change the narrative, it was a learning process for me as well as for them. And after a couple of years, I noticed the women stopped coming. The number of Black women dropped dramatically. The number of Black males started to increase. And then after that, within the next couple of years after that, I noticed I started to get this population of white women.
Yeah.
I didn't know why they were there. I didn't know why they were there. And when I began to kind of ask them, in the hallways under the, why are you taking this class? You have to be careful how you do it. And I started to find, oh, well, my boyfriend is Black and I want to understand him and his family, or, I'm trying to date some of the men on the basketball team or the football team or whatever, but I don't understand them. So they were doing research. They're getting A's.
Yeah. Very smart. Very smart.
It's a weird thing where I got to give A+ to white women in a class on Black males because they are handling all the homework assignments and reading everything to a T. They're asking me about the citations that were made by the author. I'm like, good Lord. But they were serious. They were doing research and they were serious about it. And I would say, another 3 or 4 years after that, I noticed the population shifted from, white women to Latinas. And the Latinas were coming in with the same kind of intensity, the same kind of questions, the same motivations. They were dating Black men. And this is Fresno. We're in Central California. So
yeah. No,
Black and Latino relationships here are not a strange thing by any measure. So yeah.
Well, and again, go back to your early, because I said this is kind of what this conversation was born out of. This whole topic of grabbing your passport and SYSBMs and the controversy behind that. And it's like, you're literally telling me that you had a class that was dedicated to Black men, where Black women have an opportunity to study their men, understand what they're going through, understand how to relate to them better. And instead of us doing that, you have other women of other ethnic groups, other races going in, taking notes, using that as ammo to get the quote unquote best men out there. Yeah. So it's like, how can you compete with that? This is based upon what you just said. It's like, this is why they are winning our men. If that is such a big complaint, this is why these other women, white women, Latinas, Asians, this is why they are winning or stealing, however you want to put it, our men, because they're actually interested in their interest. Like I said, it goes back to, when I asked you a few minutes ago, I was like, why are Black men asking for so little? And then you go in to say, well, they're kind of used to that. They're socialized for that. There's all these complicated dynamics. And if you meet somebody you're asking for breadcrumbs and they give you a sandwich, it's like,
oh yeah,
whoa, what is this?
No, Patrice O'Neal, one of my favorite comedians, he had a whole bit where he talked about the power of okay, like having women that actually say okay. Can you give me a glass of water? Okay. And he was like, it was mind blowing to hear a woman say it. And as funny as it was, and I remember I would listen to Patrice and all the women in my family, because I'd wait till Thanksgiving. And then I'd sit there and listen to Patrice, and the women would get more and more quiet and laugh less and less. And I would laugh more and more because he was tapping into something that I didn't know I was frustrated about. I didn't know I was curious about. And he was kind of gently raising these concerns. But one of the things he joked about in that moment was, just what it feels like to have somebody that is not only cooperative but will happily so, and just something as subtle as that, and so when you talk about the different groups of women that were coming to the class and they're involved in deep conversations in the classes about relationships, they're asking questions, it was a whole different dynamic.
Now, do you think the concern was, do you think that it was genuine, or do you think some of it, because I see some in the comments like, oh, they were kind of using it as ammo just for fetishization, but they don't see them as real men deserving of love or respect? I mean, do you think you saw some of that women using that as a way to try to manipulate better? Do you think there was a genuine?
Like I said, I've been teaching for 24 odd years, and I can tell you the way they came to the discussions, the way they participated, Yeah, there was a lot of genuine, kind of behavior, a lot of reflexivity. They're talking about their experiences. They're asking questions with a kind of genuine, kind of sensibility about it. I don't think any of it was really performed in that way. I think what threw everybody was just that anybody was interested in even having the dialogue. You know what I mean? It wasn't like they were coming to class looking for boyfriends in the class. They were coming to class to learn about black men because of the black men they were already dealing with. So it was a different kind of sensibility, and there was an earnestness to the dialogues that were happening that even black men weren't used to. And it was kind of a strange thing. It wasn't negative by any means, but it was different because when black women were the majority of the class, a lot of it was very argumentative. A lot of it was very critical of black men. I mean, I remember there was one class very early on where this young man had come out the military. He's over 6'3". He's well developed muscularly. He's almost done with his degree, and he was a virgin. He was a Christian. He was a virgin, and
Yeah.
he mentioned that in class, and the entire class of women went off on him and were trying to emasculate him at every turn. And I actually had to stop them because they weren't about to stop themselves. And it was just like, why would you come to I mean, picture that. Picture a class on black women where the majority of the class are black men who come to talk about how horrible black women are. Like when would you see that actually happen? You know what I mean?
No, would it?
And then everybody's tearing into one woman because she hasn't had sex yet. You know what I mean? It was that kind of dynamic, but the level of low key hostility, what Kevin used to call low boiling contempt, was so palpable that when that shifted over in the next couple of years, it was a strange thing to notice. Like, so even if there were somehow chameleons that were getting over on us or whatever, the level of hostility and it was far less than what it had been. So it was strange. But I can tell you the class has been an interesting kind of lesson in racial dynamics because
Yeah.
white men made their appearance too. And they made their appearance in the form of a military recruiter and a police detective who came to arrest one of the students. So,
Wow.
so if you look at it symbolically, you have white men, black women, and Hispanic and Latino women who have all made their presence felt. And the most hostile were black women and white men to the very idea of studying black men. Right? The military recruiter wanted to take these men out of college and put them in the military. And of course, the detective wanted to arrest somebody. The black women wanted to denigrate the men in the class and finger wag. And then you had white women and Latinas who wanted to take notes and ask questions. So you tell me who's the most hostile out of that?
It's so sad to hear that because it's like I hear these comments all the time in my page where, it's essentially men are venting and they're like, black women sold us out to white supremacy, or, black women, they're the biggest white supremacists. So, essentially things on that line. And it's like, I'm never quick to just paint a broad stroke and to say, well, all black men are this or all black women are that. Cause I'm like, that's just simply not my experience. Right. But it's like at the same time, what you mentioned, a class that was supposed to be about Black male studies. And when you initially started the paradigm and what was so comfortable at that moment for everybody was to essentially just blame black men. It didn't sound like it was comfortable or even expected to have a honest conversations about, hey, maybe men have struggled where they have been victimized and how that's impacted the family. Because it's like, and a community is made up of men and women. So both bring stuff to the table. And I honestly am quite sick of the conversation that I've heard for a long time where it's like, it's just all black men's fault. No, I'm not saying that, there haven't been black men out there and there haven't been things that can be improved. You literally have channels of black men talking about the different issues that black men do to themselves. But it's like I think this culture of, again, you can't also go shine the light on women or you're being misandrist or you're being everything other than the son of God. Like, it's just really not healthy. And, again, going back to when I asked this simple question, how to support black men practically. And I was shocked and not shocked at the response and the behavior. And it resonated with me so much. And I thought, even when I'm thinking about this different conversation in the pygmy space and the different, female content creators that
Yeah.
I love what they're doing and I love how we're having this conversation. But I'm thinking, I don't think any of us are really have been trained or taught or know what it means to lean in and say, okay, well, what are their interests? Because we can talk about it. Like I said, the last week or two, I've heard women talking about the best interests of Black men, which I think is good. We should have the conversation. But how many of us know how to listen?
Well, and not only listen not to argue. Like there are situations where somebody will listen to you just to find things to use against you later. And this is one of the things that many Black men report to me about relationships and dialogue, issues they've had with trying to converse with their with their women in relationships. And it's one, I don't, she refuses to listen, but when she does, it's only to use something against me later when I'm vulnerable. So there's a there's a lessening kind of sense of willingness to volunteer information that might be used against me later. So that kind of stoic front that men are socialized to bring to the table is affirmed to that to even more of a degree, because if anything, if it's just going to lead to you trying to hurt me more, then I'll do this stoic thing all day. The difficulty comes when you run across somebody who is willingly trying to be peaceful in your space. I had a couple brothers, and these are brothers in their late 50s who finally, after multiple marriages and multiple situations, are in relationships that are supportive. And they'll call me and be like, yo, she brought me a glass of juice, and she brought me a sandwich I didn't ask for. These small infinitesimal acts of service
Yeah.
that I remember one brother called me and said, this woman walked in here and she decided to clean the cuticles on my nails and cut my nails, and I didn't ask for it. He was like, but he damn near called me like, should I leave? Like, should I be worried? Do it. And I was like, hey man, I'm taking notes on you. Shit, I ain't had that happen yet. It goes to what you were saying very early on. It's a response to not being familiar with being treated nicely and waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know what I mean? Waiting for the negative to come out of it. And some men talk about that when they'll deal with situations where niceness is performed only to get something back. It's a tit for tat.
Okay.
Where you have some women that'll say, well, here's my list of receipts. I baked you a cake, I made you a sandwich. Why can't you do this, this, and that? That's what a lot of men tend to expect at best if they get niceness. But when they actually experience genuine kindness, there's a disarming that happens there that a lot of men are not really ready for. And I can tell you, the brothers that have gone through it, it took years before they were willing to put their guard down and say, you know what, I trust her. And sadly, out of the group of brothers that I can point to that have reported those experiences, they weren't with American Black women. And I'm not saying that with any kind of happiness, joy.
Yeah.
I'm just saying simply that's what it was. They had to go out of the country. And I mean Canada, South America, Caribbean, Africa, Europe, Asia. They went literally around the world to experience niceties that you would think shouldn't be that difficult. We're not talking about global changes. We're talking about just niceness, just peace.
Yeah, that is the first thing that I took away when I asked that question a few days ago, where it's like an overwhelming response other than thank you, because I was literally asking, what do you guys want? And they're like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm like, oh, great, can you tell me what you want? And then the few who did respond, it was like, can you just treat me like a human? It's like, can you just see me as an individual? And I'm like, the bar is to hell at this point. If this is what we could come up with.
I would just say, a couple of years ago, there was a real opportunity because you had Black men asking for the bare minimum. Now you have a conversation with passport bros, which really signifies a frustration that has that Black men have sought an answer to. You know what I mean? But a couple of years ago, if there were, I used to tell BGS this, if there were a mass movement of sisters that were like, okay, we are out there to be kind and genuinely so, I don't know if this discussion would be happening right now. But since that didn't happen, what you have in response is a critical plan to figure out where that happiness is going to come from. And when you really get to the core of how basic it is, and that's what I appreciate about what you're bringing up today. It really is basic, or at least it has been. It's becoming more complicated. Men are starting to figure out that if they can find this kind of human kindness, this human connection, this willingness to be received and accepted as men, if they're able to find that, now you're starting to see that hunger increase. Okay, well, if I can find it here, can I find it politically? Can I find it organizationally? Can I find it in my relationships, even with other men? Now you're seeing it start to grow and become something else. So the conversation that some women are having needed to kind of be had several years ago. But I can
Several
tell
years
you,
ago.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
but I can tell you, for the women that are doing it in earnest, there's a respect. There's a respect for the women on YouTube who seem to be consistent and serious, and it's appreciated by men who are not used to it. Matter of fact, it's appreciated to such a degree that you might see a sister pull into 100,000 subs behind men just wanting to hear a woman demonstrate that she's heard them. It's an interesting dynamic to watch.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm still rather new on the YouTube street, so I don't pretend to be an expert and know what works, not works. But yeah, I will say, like I said, the
Oh, no, you're
conversation.
gonna grow.
Huh?
Your channel's gonna grow. You're gonna grow.
Hey,
So
I'll receive it. I'll receive all the positive vibes and energy. I appreciate it. Real quick, I did see, I think, a few super chats come in. Shout out to Dane C. It says, "Hey Shay," and salute Professor Johnson. Thanks for hanging out. It's always good to see you here, Dane C. Shout out to, is it no one for the 4.99? Says Dr. T Tax. Thanks for being here.
shout out to them.
Um, yeah, to your earlier response, and I think you hit on something that I think was so crucial, where you said men essentially asking to be nice, and this was probably years ago, right? And now this conversation is coming up, but for many it seems too late. I think that was some of what of the initial pushback to the whole concept of stab saber community black men, that whole thing, right? I think that was a pushback because you had men where it's just like, Sister Sharazad Ali, she was having these same conversations decades ago.
Yeah, she was, and she paid the
So
price for it too.
I'm sorry.
She paid the price for it. She was treated like crap for so
Horrible.
long. Um,
Yeah.
and ironically, she was proven right so many years later. Even some of the other women who were public, who were well known, like Ayanna Van Zandt, ended up, confirming the
Farming.
very thing she
Yeah.
was arguing back in the 1980s. She went through hell to put her stuff out there, and really is only getting her accolades in the last few years, in my opinion.
Very interesting. Yeah, I just simply wasn't around at the time to kind of know all of what she went through, or wasn't old enough to remember. But um, all I can say is to have someone like her raise some of these issues that we're talking about now at that time, and to have been so ostracized, I think is very telling.
Mm.
And you have men, um, I guess now, who are in the prime of their career, or in the prime of their life, where they are settling down. They do have time to invest in a wife, a family, to build. And they're probably looking back and they remember that. They remember the time when they were in their teens, in their 20s, in the 30s, and all of that. And so, again, just I spend a lot of time trying to observe and trying to understand what's going on. And just the last week or two, and seeing the not only the pushback, but seeing like the emotion and the vitriol to this whole idea of like, no, you should stay, like save the community, and all this. I understand the desire, and I understand the desire to want to help improve women, right? To improve essentially the product in America. If you look at dating and mating as somewhat of a product, if you will. I understand the desire for that. And yet it's so complex, because just trying to do the whole soft girl thing anymore now, or just trying to be the nice thing, it's like there's been so many bridges burned, and it's like, how do you repair something that has been broken for so long?
Yeah.
Um, it requires change on so many different levels. This is why I talked about this in a video a few days ago. I was like, okay, if there's to be a true initiative about stealing Black men back or encouraging a generation of men in America to stay with women in America, there will need to be revolution in like every aspect of society. We're talking religiously, politically, social, economically, like in every way that men and women interact, there would have to be change in all of those areas if we were to see a cultural shift.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like, apart from that, I don't know that that's going to happen, and I think we just might have to just be okay and accept the fact, and honestly maybe encourage men to go where they're finally going to be and feel respected, and I think it's okay for that, you know.
It it
um
it, it definitely it would take a huge turn. This is one of the things we're seeing. Seeing things now that we really many men didn't think they'd ever see. Many Black men never thought. I've heard more apology videos from Black women just in the last 6 months than I've heard in my entire life.
Really?
Oh yeah, there's been a lot more apology videos that we recognize you, we're sorry, and I've never heard this many
We
apologies.
need you, Black men. We need you.
Yeah.
It's like
No,
it's not.
yes, and it's not an accident that it seems to be happening right around the time they're reporting that Black women are the most evicted demographic, right? You know, so Black men are noticing these connections and they're just sitting back and watching. I
Mm.
just saw a report today that came out, I believe, the Washington Post, that were saying that women were extremely frustrated because Black men were not donating sperm to sperm banks. Only 2% of sperm comes from Black.
Really
Oh yeah.
interesting.
So in the article even pointed out, you have Black women who are going to sperm banks, trying to find a way to have a baby before they're not able to anymore, and they can't even find, So it's a weird dynamic where
Wow.
Black men are finding themselves being sought after hearing for decades that you ain't shit, you're not worthy, you're trifling, you're this, you're that, and that was the language used in the 80s. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So the language has only developed since then, and it's only really been in the last couple of years that we've heard this kind of reversal. I remember I said a couple months ago, I was pointing out that some of the Black men that heard in the 80s that you needed to be six figures to be worthy of love and respect for women, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Some of those men actually did begin to achieve that, and they found that there was no love and respect that came with earning six figures. Now you have plenty of the game guys that are telling you you got to act a certain way, you got to use game a certain way, and so on and so forth. But you find in other groups, they don't necessarily have to do that to get a modicum of basic level respect. But I made mention of this in conversation with Judge Joe Brown,
Mm.
and I posted this on my community tab because he said something that knocked me off my chair. So I told him, I said, yeah, at six figures, some of these brothers are finding that they've been lied to, that the basic level respect doesn't come. And he said, young man, it doesn't come at eight figures either.
Wow.
So when you have somebody like Judge Joe Brown, celebrity,
That's crazy.
eight-figure earning Black man, who's telling you you can't get basic level respect even then, that does something. That
And
really.
he's saying, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
He's saying he was making in reference to just how he's perceived in the general society or how he's perceived in
Oh,
the overall Black community.
talking about Black America. We were talking about Black America because that was the arrangement I grew up under as Generation X.
Mm.
I'm 48 years old. I'm almost 50. So what we were told starting in the 80s, this is not something my mother or my grandmother's generation dealt with. This was something that came afterwards. But this idea was you had to earn six figures. You had to be over 6'2". This was the beginning of the list. You know what I mean? If our grandmothers had the list, many of us wouldn't even be here right now. But this didn't really kick in until the 1980s and onward, as women were starting to transition out of four-year colleges and into white-collar employment. They were looking to find men that could match, and all of that. And so that was where you had a lot of that language. Eddie Murphy used to talk about it a lot. By the time you got to Eddie Murphy Raw, that's what he was dialoguing about, this shift, this major shift in Black mating culture where women were starting to make these kinds of demands. And Judge Joe Brown is obviously, well accomplished by that time from then to now. And so for him to weigh in like that, it was a confirmation for a lot of Black men that if you
Wow.
can't get it at six or eight figures, then
Figures.
you need to, at some point, you need to go where you're welcome. And I don't care where that is. If you found it, great. I support
Found
you no
it.
matter what it is. I mean, I used to be a hardcore nationalist and I was really hard on interracial relationships. At this point, after watching what brothers go through, I have no criticism for brothers wherever they find their peace.
I mean, I would probably say that I had a similar position on. Well, I think I was just kind of like your average black. I'll just be honest, your average black woman, where you look at a man who's interracially dating and you think he hate his mama, you know, he's a sellout. They just kind of have that, and I think it just took time to me, quite honestly, to hear the other side and understand and to say, okay, actually, it's not that simple.
Yeah,
it's not that simple. So now it's like I understand it, and it is sad. You know, it's sad to me if that's how many men feel. And I could go and say, you know, well, these men are just this and they're gaslighting. I could go down that road, but it's also like, look, at a certain time, if you have a movement behind something, whether or not you agree with it, it's at least worth you investigating to figure out why why is it that you have the SYSBMs, or why is it that you have the passport bros for black women out there who do see it as offensive? Why? Because if we are being right, if black women are losing to women in third world countries that they say live in bushes or live in squalor or dirt, if we are being won by those women who maybe don't have all the mani and the petties and the wigs and the weaves and the sandals, and they're in humble, really, really humble settings, if we are losing to them, what is that saying about what is going on here? And I think an unwillingness to at least engage and try to understand. Yeah, you're going to hear some people who are saying who are just saying downright misogynistic things or just being hateful. You're going to hear that, but I don't think that necessarily undermines the overall cry or the overall frustration that has been able to galvanize a pretty large group of men, you know? So really quick, shout out to you, Mr. Donnie Mack, with the 5 on the super chat. It says, as black women have become more liberal with their womb, black men have become more conservative with their seed. Very interesting.
Shout out to Donnie. Indigo, what's up?
Shout out to Indigo, Scholar Tack. Shout out to Chez, Chardé, and Dr. T's-on. Thank you for this. Shout out to you, kosher clinician. Good to see you. It's a shout out to Shay and Doc. Good to see you, kosher clinician, and Dr. Thunder.
What up, kosher? Dr. Thunder, what's up?
I see you here to support my bro, Dr. Hasan Johnson. Dig your work, Shay. Hope to collaborate with you. Thank you for stopping by. I appreciate it. Let's see, Dr. T Tax. I think I saw some from Malarkey. I don't know if you're still here. It's always good to hang out with Malarkey. I did see that 20 super chat come through. Thank you for being so generous. I wanted to read it because I think there were some thoughts. Also, shout out to you, Larry R, for a new member. I had like a few members come over the last week, so I'm gonna have to do like a members only live soon. There we go. It says, I'm running a little short this month, but I had to put out a few dusty British pounds. Their values have plummeted in recent weeks. In support of my 2 favorite content creators, I hope others follow suit in their support. Thank you, Malarkey, so much for your generosity. It's always good to have you. And Teddy KGB with the 5. It says, thank you for the content. Thank all of you guys for being here. If you are on here, hit the like button. As always, if you'd like to show support to the show, what we're doing, you can find me on CASHAPP, VENMO, CHardé. As always, I'll be sure to acknowledge super chats, cash apps, all of that. And we're just talking about how to support Black men practically. And it's been a really interesting conversation born out of a simple question on how can Black women support Black men practically? Born out of that simple question, I think, was so much to unpack. That's what we've been attempting to do here. Shout out to Vinci Lindsay. I don't know if I got it. It's the 199 on the super chat, but thank you for that. So I want to ask you, and you've alluded to this, but if you want to kind of explain further, then feel free to. But what has been the main pushback you've gotten so far in reference to a political agenda that speaks primarily or directly to the issues of Black men?
Well, I'd say that the first response was absolute silence. I mean, this has been something we developed in 2020. We developed it, in the, coming up on the presidential election. Nobody really said much about it. There was a handful of brothers, on the channel that were involved with putting it together, volunteering ideas. But in terms of outside of that, not much. So there's been a lot of silence until really a few weeks ago. As a matter of fact, it really kind of caught me off guard, where I started to hear more and more people talking about it, having responses about it. And then you started to see, some intense pushback around, whether or not it was even needed, whether or not it could be passed. I mean, this looks unrealistic. You started to hear these kind of critiques. And my whole thing was, look, before we get to step 2 of figuring out how it can be implemented, I still want to figure out what Black men want.
Right.
No, I could make assumptions, but I thought it'd be far more constructive to have brothers themselves really put this out there. And one of the major responses I've seen from Black men has been shock. And I'm talking about, so you got brothers on the left, brothers on the right, brothers who, don't deal with the bipartisanism at all. You got nationalist revolutionaries, you got hardcore conservatives, and they're reading over this and they're going, you know what? There's a lot in this. You know what I mean? Especially if you've been divorced, especially if you've, had to deal with law enforcement, especially, whatever the particular area is, I'm finding more and more Black men across the political spectrum that have something to say because they've had these experiences and they know that if we had certain ideas out there and operating on our behalf, it could make the, quality of life a little better for Black boys and men. But this is not something we've really ever thought about as a collective or as a demographic, and nobody's bothered to ask us. The closest thing we get, and I've said this repeatedly, is occasionally when someone's running for office, they'll stop by a barber shop and they'll have this kind of photo op moment where they sit with a bunch of men for a quick second and shoot the shit back and forth, and then that's the end of it. It's 30 minutes tops, and that's it. But it's not really a critical space of really getting at the heart of what Black men want. And like you discovered, that doesn't make it easy, even if you do ask, because a lot of us have never been asked. We've never been asked. So it took a couple years to get where it is. As of yesterday, we finally got to 15 points, where brothers are saying these are things that we're looking for. So I mean, if you wanted to translate that into a relationship thing where you ask the question, what can Black women do to be supportive or to engage or even understand what Black men want, I think it would start with a need to listen, and a need to listen using something like this to kind of understand, what it is we've been going through. Because one of the things we tried to highlight with this were the structural barriers that Black men face. And so by, pointing out policies that might lift these structural barriers, if you're reading through it, you have to come into grips with dealing with what those structural barriers are. And these are often barriers that Black women don't face in the same kind of way. If we talk about family court reform, which is the most popular item on there, Black men and women have very different experiences as far as that's concerned. So those are the kind of things that would need to be discussed.
Okay. So again, just listening, bare minimum, but listening. And again, that was something that I noticed too, where when you're talking about these concerns, what I didn't hear, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I didn't hear was men necessarily asking for a woman to champion these causes. And this is something, I think this is a popular narrative that we hear where Black women are the mules, or Black women are the one to save the community, or Black women are the one to kind of hold things together. We've heard that. We've watched it in movies, read it in novels, seen it portrayed in different shows, what Black women kind of being the backbone. And something that really stood out to me, again, around this whole idea of a political agenda that is essentially about trying to help establish or maybe bring change in institutional discrepancies or issues. None of the men that I heard or responded were asking for Black women to lead that cause. Contrary to all the narratives and all the things that we have all heard, I didn't hear any of them say we need Black women to go and try to go, like I said, do a march in Washington or go create a political, like I heard none of that.
No,
so
it's not that at all. No. But I will say, in the last almost decade, even those kind of political dynamics with Black men and women working together have been called into question in ways that we couldn't fathom prior. I mean, if you go from the civil rights movement to the Black Power movement, hell, even the movement about South Africa, you couldn't fathom Black men and women not working together. But when you come to what we might generically call this BLM era, we were introduced to a whole nother element of this discussion where you have this particular group of Black women, mostly Black intersectional feminists, who are willing to use Black male bodies to advance their own political agenda. And this is one of the things I refer to as a Black masculinist turn. This was something even people like Darren Seals saw on the streets of Ferguson early on, but it took the rest of us years to really kind of catch up with. Once Black men started to realize that you could have a dynamic where you have an organization that refused to allow Black men to serve in any position of leadership, that would not recognize chapters led by heterosexual Black men who were intense and serious about, improving the Black community and fighting these kind of issues that are these groups and these institutions that are attacking the Black community. When you saw those men not able to participate, you saw these kind of groups talking about they want to dismantle the nuclear family, and the only member of the nuclear family they wouldn't mention were fathers. When you started to see the level of hostility that was directed at Black men, there was a moment of pause and really some disbelief. And then it continued to snowball over the next few years, right? And as Black men witnessed this, we really came to this kind of observation. This is why I call it a Black masculinist turn, where you say, wow, this is a new dynamic. This is not what we saw in documentaries, going back to the Panthers, going back, again, the 55 from 55 to 68 civil rights movement. This is a new dynamic. And so if Black women are clearly advocating for themselves, even some of whom are willing to use our carcasses, our dead carcasses for their own advancement, we need to actually figure out what are our political interests and do they differ? Do they actually differ? I mean, we had a sense that they do, but can we actually write out on paper what it is we're interested in seeing, and does it align with the things we've heard in the last decade Black women espouse about what they need? And what we're slowly starting to figure out is when you really get into the weeds of it, Black men have concerns that are that haven't been heard even by other Black men, and are radically different in some respects. And this is one of the reasons I think you get to a Killer Mike, where he's willing to say, you know what, I'm going to sit and listen to candidates no matter what side of the aisle they're on and decide who gets my vote, as opposed to we're just voting Democrat because that's what we've always done. That's what we're and I'm not saying that I'm, as a conservative or as a liberal, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm an independent. But I think you have Black men that are moving to a space of, well, we can't tell the difference in the quality of life under a Republican or a Democrat president. Black women can, because they're experiencing advancements under Democrats that are specifically earmarked for them. I've written papers dealing with the numbers of electoral candidates that are coming up in the last 20 years. They are overwhelmingly female out of the Black community. A lot of that has to do with education, because I mean, think about it. If you're running for office, it's expected that you have a college degree. But if you have Black men who are struggling coming out of high school, the numbers going to college, 70% of Black men drop out their first year. Those are national numbers.
Oh, wow.
If that's in place, then you can see the impact down the road on electoral representation. So Black women are moving and advancing into electoral politics because they've been earmarked and targeted for schools, for college, for white collar education. So clearly electoral is the next notch on the belt. And those are the kinds of advances that they're beginning to experience under Democrats. Black men, like I said, we don't experience a different quality of life under either regime. So for us, if our votes become important and we're starting to notice that they're becoming more and more important, then you're going to need to cater to our interests to get those votes. And the only thing I saw as missing was that we never articulated what our interests were.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Really, really quick before I move on to the next question, guys, I see 365 watching and only 270 likes. So let's get those likes up if we can. Also, if this is resonating with you, please show support to the show. You can find me on CASHAPP or VENMO, Chez, CHARDE. Also, super chats, I'll be sure to acknowledge. Thank you, Larry R, for the 5. The super chat, it says, we Black men know most BF are not going to leave their safety net, the white survivalist system, aka white zaddy. It's so interesting. I know I'm curious if anybody has looked at this or criticized you for saying that this would be considered divisive, but it's so interesting to me how these things have to be created like separately, or these agendas are separate. And I'm not, it's like, how do we get to this point? Because that's what you said, like, there's a certain time where there was no time where it was Black woman's agenda or Black man, it was a Black community. And I think even today, when you look at other communities, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think I necessarily, maybe outside of a feminist framework, you don't necessarily see like, here's the Chinese woman political agenda, here's the Chinese man political agenda. It's like,
yeah,
work together. Like, so it's, you scratch your head and you're like, how do we even get here? And then, I'm just curious if you get criticisms of it being divisive or it being seen as, misogynistic or, things like that.
It's starting. It's starting. I mean, the first step is they ignore you. And once it gets to a point where they can't ignore you, then they denigrate you. And it becomes, a kind of, attack on your person, as it were, calling you out your name, that kind of, I'm transitioning into that now. And then they have to deal with you once it gets to another point. So those are the stages. And I'm just coming out of, this being ignored, and it's moving into the ad hominem attacks on, on me as an individual, on the brothers in the space who are willing to push this list and have conversations about it, even conversations amongst their own family. That's considered enough to have them labeled all kinds of ways, misogynistic, they hate Black folk. There's all these kinds of language. Exactly, Indigo, sign language. There's a lot of that's going on, a lot of shaming, but that's just starting to happen. Because like I said, this list has been up for 2 years. It's been up for people to peruse and add to, and it's only been a select few that have been willing to publicly make those contributions. But on my channel, we've had discussions about it several times, but it's just kind of starting to transition into that. And I think there's a shock by some, even Black men, who are surprised that Black women are this far apart on certain issues. Yeah, they really are. But here's the irony to it: when they read through it, it's like, wow, I might actually agree with more than I want to say publicly. Because how do you actually disagree with targeted homeless programs for Black men if Black men are the majority of the homeless by rate? How do you disagree with education and the focus on Black boys when Black boys are the ones that are expelled and pushed into special ed at the youngest ages, and it has nothing to do with academic performance. It has everything to do with what's perceived to be behavior. And then there's data that's also coming out the same time period showing us that white teachers are criminalizing Black boys even in their assumptions about what Black boys are doing when nothing is happening whatsoever. So these kind of things are really just calling to bear what people have known but didn't want to publicly acknowledge, and it's kind of leading to that. So I think that's where it's coming to, where and like even the critiques I've heard in the last few months have been more around, well, I don't know if I like this because I don't know if it's a left, right, or right wing thing, and they're trying to decide if I'm left or right to determine if they like it, without having read through it. And then when they read through it, it's like, what? I actually agree with a number of and again, some of this comes with a certain level of maturity. Once you have kids, you have kids, you've gone through family court, you've had to deal with law enforcement, you've dealt with some type of intimate partner homicide or violence or intimate partner violence. If you've ever been even lightly falsely accused of something at the workplace or even in your own home, it takes those kind of life experiences before the weight of these conversations really begin to impact you.
Yeah. That brings up a couple of questions because, you said, okay, so the initial is shock, right? And then there's certain people where it's like, there's the fear of, for some reason, not wanting to be associated with it. When, from my understanding, I read through all 15 points. I personally didn't see anything that seemed outlandish. Now, there are a few things I had questions on that I wrote down, but overall, what I took away was it like we just want to be actually treated equally. Finally, like we don't want to be the most targeted in all of these different areas, and where we have been the most targeted, we want to be given a chance to be treated as equals. Like that's essentially what I walked away getting. And as someone who has parents or has different family members who have been involved in the educational system, I've heard stories, personal stories of how little boys all the way to Black men in college have the struggles that they've had trying to navigate the educational system and how that impacts them. So like I know, just even coming down to that, how on so many different levels, even in the levels where people engage in to try to get an upper hand. Even in that process, there's all these little extra added barriers. So it's so interesting to me how, something that would be literally men standing up and saying, hey, we just finally want to be treated equal. Like we're not.
I think that the tone is a little different. It's more along the lines of we don't expect that willingly society is going to change. We understand that we're under fire. We always have been, and they're not going to stop. It's not so much a request to be treated human as it is kind of a manifesto for ourselves on what it is we value. And from here, how can we leverage whatever position we're in to push for the kinds of policies that might benefit us? I give this example in class. When I talk about the civil rights movement, you're talking about a small percentage of America, particularly in the South, that's been getting abused and attacked, for generations, right? The only reason that you get this group getting global exposure is because the United States, after World War II, finds itself in the midst of the Cold War. And in the midst of the Cold War, the United States is saying to the world, we are the example you should follow, while Russia is saying the same. So you have this tension between the US and Russia about who has the best model for the world to follow. And now all of a sudden, now that we have the technology to have international news, right? We got magazines and now video that's going all over the world. In this critical political moment, all of a sudden, these little tiny Black folk living in the midst of the South who are being attacked by dogs and police officers who are being arbitrarily locked up and lynched, that's been happening since the end of slavery. But now all of a sudden it has global importance. So they're able to leverage their position, even though they don't have power, they don't have money, they don't have resources, they don't even really have politicians that are working to their advantage. But they're able to leverage a situation at a critical time period that got them the attention of the world. And then all of a sudden, you had people on the other side of the planet talking about this population of people in the midst of Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama. You know what I mean? What I'm saying is what's going on with Black men and technology and social media, right, is an opportunity to leverage at a particular critical moment where candidates are asking about what it takes to get Black males voting interest, where men all over the world are looking at Black men in the United States to understand how to navigate feminism in their environments and deal with dating and mating on those terms. And then starting to ask the question, how might this be transitioned politically where I am? This is another critical moment, and we don't fully understand it the way we understood the civil rights movement because we've had generations to reflect on that time period. We're in the midst of it now. But I'm saying there is a way where small groups can take advantage of the leverage they can extend on their situation in the right moment. And Black men are, I believe, are in a position to do that. We just have to clarify to ourselves what it is we value. So when I get back to the list, I don't think it's as much a request to be seen as human as it is a conversation to and for Black men to say, this is what we need to improve our quality of life. How can we leverage this position to force people or force institutions to participate in it? Because for one reason or another, it may serve their interest to do so. I mean, attorney Dennis Sperling, who was in the chat a little bit earlier, shout out to Sperling. He came on my show the other night and made some brilliant points about how certain policy suggestions might be in the interest of various parties. So it's not that they would grant us policies because they like us, but because it may actually work to their interest and work to ours at the same time. Right? These are the kinds of conversations we're having to try and figure out how we can reimagine the way we interact with politics, policy, and figure out how we can begin to bend the environment to our will to suit our interests by leveraging what we do have access to. Because if it was just about money and power, Black folk have never had that.
No.
And if we were just going to leave it at that, then we'd never have anything. But we have been able to, make changes and force the public to meet our needs at critical moments. No reason to stop now.
Okay, so that makes sense because to your point, there's never going to be a time based upon at least American history, we know and understand how the government sees this folk, period. So we shouldn't expect that one day they're going to wake up and say, oh yeah, we're going to all of a sudden just start treating Black men equally, although we see them as a direct threat to the system that we set up. Like that's not going to happen. So it's like you have to, at this point, leverage whatever you have, understand your position, and then do what you can to try to get the results that you want. and know that it's going to be done strategically, not necessarily as a handout per se.
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you look at Black feminists, that's precisely what they did. In the late 1960s and early 70s, many of them hitched their wagon to white feminists, and they leveraged their position as women. They took advantage of the political moment in the 60s, 70 transition period, and they began to advance their interest along those lines of, feminism and this idea of universal sisterhood, right? And this is where Black men had to acknowledge this shift, because in many ways there were people who were invested in undermining Black advancement using gender. And so you had, some of these feminists that decided that it would be advantageous to participate in that for their own advancement. And this is the transition point where Black folk, or Black men in particular, are noticing that the Black agenda is now splitting. And so now you have Black women who have one foot in one camp, one foot in the other, and they're trying to take advantage of one versus the other, depending on what the situation is. But Black men have never said, you know what, let's figure out our politics. We never did. We still continue to advocate for this communal idea of a Black community. And it's only in the last couple of years where I've heard brothers in distinct little spaces saying, you know what, we actually have to figure this out. Because even if you think about Ice Cube and his plan, there was no plan for Black men in it. He wasn't thinking about Black men. He was talking about Black communal uplift. You know what I mean? If you look at these brothers who were trying to put together plans, who were trying to improve the Black community, you've heard very few of them actually say, what are the things Black men need? They didn't. When the Cocktails with Queens jumped on Ice Cube about not having a plan for women, nobody said anything. You notice they didn't say, you have this plan for men and you ignored women. They said you ignored women. And he said, well, this is for the whole community. And they said, it's not enough. We need something for women. But it never even dawned on Cube that Black men might need something specifically. So this is a very new conversation in certain respects.
So you said Black men have been conditioned, right, to think in terms of the larger, broader community, whereas Black women have been conditioned to think largely in terms of their gender. At least over the last couple of decades. Now, with the Black male political agenda, provided some of these different changes are made and there is policies that were made in their favor, do you think that this would drive or could drive a further wedge between Black men and Black women, larger than what already exists? Or do you think that the advancement of Black men would actually lead to a ricochet effect of the improvement of the overall community?
I mean, it depends on what Black folk decide. I don't push an agenda of splitting the community or bringing it together. My question is to Black men, what do you want? And letting Black men and participating in that discussion to the degree where we decide as a group what it is that serves us best. And so that's kind of the stage I'm taking with it. It doesn't have to further split the community, but it all depends in many respects on how it's received. How many Black men actually began to burn down the community when Black women started to articulate a feminist agenda? Most Black men just kind of quietly took it, like, okay, that's what's happening.
That's true. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
So if this is received as something incendiary, it's like, well, that's a choice, because it doesn't, that doesn't have to necessarily be perceived that way. To suggest that we're trying to improve the quality of life for boys and men who've been ignored, when nothing in here is an attempt to denigrate women, then that has to be an active choice you make and how you choose to interpret it. I'm merely trying to get men to point out the areas that have been ignored in the last 50 years. Point out the areas that nobody's asking about, nobody seems to care about, nobody seems to advocate for, and there haven't been any critical policies passed on behalf of these boys and men. And I can't remember since when. So if that's a problem for anyone, that's telling in and of itself. With Black men starting to and we're not even talking about passing policy. We're just talking about having a conversation about policy. If that's enough to push certain groups, whether they be women or whatever, to a point of being disgruntled, then we, at the end of the day, the problems are bigger than most people probably think.
Right.
And we already know they are, because we've never seen a time period where a whole demographic, well, I won't say a whole demographic, but a significant portion of Black men are talking about international relations with women. We've never really seen this on this scale.
Yeah.
In that conversation publicly. And I'll tell you the ultimate irony, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, is when you have brothers leave the country to go find Black women from other countries. Right. So one of the most dismissive things I've heard about
Yep.
this
Yep.
national interest for men and looking for women elsewhere is, oh, they just want white women, or they just want Latinas. But when he shows up with a woman that's darker than you, now what? So if
Do you
that's where the
think?
conversation is, and we're having political conversations outside of Black women, that tells you how far this has come. I mean, I haven't seen Black men begin to even talk about themselves, and this is in the midst of decades of shit. Man, I've sat in these classes. I was here's the thing. I was required to take classes on feminism. I was required to study gender as it was presented to me as a way of getting my degree. It wasn't even up for discussion. I didn't get to choose. I took classes that had nothing to do with gender, and the professors made it about gender. And gender was meant only feminine, meant only female. That was it. So if this is required reading for me, where I have to read the Bell Hookses, the Patricia Hill Collins, I have to sit here and read the Barbara Christians and the Combahee River collectives. I have to read it, but you can't sit through a 45-minute YouTube video, or you can't read a website where Black men are talking about what they need politically and see the benefit it would have for your own sons or brothers. If that's the way it is, then the problems are worse off than we think.
Which, again, going back to your earlier point, while I will support and continue to support, Black women who stand up and vocalize desires to try to help the problem and support Black men, I also understand while it can be met with scrutiny and it can be met oftentimes with a lot of suspicion. And in some ways, there can be a lot of pushback if something that is perceived as, feminist minded or dismissive or whatever. Like, I could see how there could be a very natural reaction to that, or a sensitivity to that because of what you just stated, because of, I think because in this culture, and you mentioned the Duluth model, right? How the assumption that men basically always have it better and men are always on top. It doesn't matter what the race is. Then anytime a man's going to be advocating for themselves, of course that's going to be seen as detrimental. Of course it's going to be seen as selfish, because they've already convinced themselves that you're in the privileged position. Whether or not the empirical data speaks to something different is but they've convinced themselves that you're in a privileged position. So how dare you advocate for yourself when you're supposed to be advocating for me because you're privileged? And it's like, gosh, is that brainwashing? Is it just misunderstanding? Is it entitlement? Is it all of the above? But, this is why, I go back to, I like to speak to women first about the importance of just accountability, right? Just in your own life. If you have things in your own life you want to change, you got to start with you, because that's the only one you have control over. But also the importance of understanding what people around you want. Like, anytime you're in relationship with something, or, women understand this. They understand this stuff great when it comes to work. A woman knows if she wants to get a job, if she wants to get into a particular position, she knows how to write her resume. She knows how to put down the skills that are going to apply to that particular job. She knows how to submit. She knows how to work the system. She knows how to code switch. It's like women know how to work great, right? Within white men's system, however you put it. We understand this amazingly, but somehow now when it comes to how to get along with men in our community, and there's all this confusion, or there's all these emotions, trauma, however you want to put it, that can make something so simple so complicated.
I think you had somebody in the chat just say something. I had to fight myself from laughing. I think it was BG. It says, African women are so nice to me, it's scary, and they already have green cards.
They already
but it speaks to what we're talking about, right? Just, this whole idea where you have a population of, women that are saying, you know what, we're interested in you. If they won't take you, we will. That's a dynamic that I think are new to, and I've seen brothers, get married in situations like that where they're like, she came at me like a defensive end, like she wasn't playing. And it wasn't like she did it because she needed citizenship. She looked at me and was like, okay, he's handsome, he's accomplished, he's earning good money, he seems like a good man, he wants to be a father. and nobody wants him. And I have brothers who are tenured full professors who were tracked down and tackled by women. And they were like, I don't know what your women are on, but I got you. And the funny part is, and these men report to me that that's when they'll notice that African American women will be upset, that they got with someone else. But these are the same women that didn't want to have nothing to do with them when they were single. So they're dealing with that, and they're sought after and they're valued. But it's only then that it's a problem. So it's one of the things that it is what it is.
Quite honestly, I think some of us need to be, instead of us getting so mad and on our feelings, which, look, human beings, you can get mad and you can be feelings for a few seconds, but I think honestly we should be taking notes. Because like you said, how many of these Black men are going abroad and they're not bringing back, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Scandinavian. Some of them maybe, but they're bringing up Scandinavian. Like a lot of them, they're bringing other Black women. I'm actually think I'm going to do video about this, but I saw it was he's like a popular YouTuber out in Africa, and he did a video where his woman proposed to him, and they're married now. A few years been married, and I was looking at one of his videos, and I saw like she was all in there, just like, I'm just here to support my husband. I'm just here to support my husband, like all the pick me vibes. And then I went in her channel, and I saw like she had a lot of it was like based upon femininity, and she had this one video in particular when she's like, oh, here's an average day of a housewife in a village. So she was kind of going like people countryside, more in like more rural, humble areas. And it just was so interesting because it was like, okay, women in the countryside, it's 4 a.m. They're up, they're cooking their jollof rice, they're sweeping the house, they're cleaning the clothes by hand. Like it was so interesting to watch the whole thing and just sit back and say, wow, like this is your life, this is your expectation, this is what they do. They go, she said there's a certain time of the day they all go, all the women, they go and they start taking care of the kids, and they're like, we washing the kid as the other mom goes and prepares whatever. Like very much a community minded mindset, very much this emphasis on taking care, managing the home. And mind you, this is like in the village, in like the rural countryside. This wasn't in some like big old beautiful mansion. I mean, this was more in like humble spaces. But I'm like, whether or not they had all the, like I said, the wigs, weaves, and sandals or not, like these women, they essentially had all of the basics of femininity. Not all the I'm feminine because I can makeup, or I'm feminine because I can lay my edges with some pro style. It's like they were humble and there wasn't all the glitz and glam, but they had the basics needed. And I'm like, if this is what men are going abroad to find women who are, they don't have all that other frilly stuff, but they are openly supportive to their men to the point to where they would even propose to some of them maybe, or openly praise them in different spaces when they see their men excelling. Grab a passport.
I'll say this as a professor who is constantly dealing with new groups of young people every year, and as a father to a now 17-year-old, what I'm witnessing amongst the youth is something I think average everyday Black women need to be far more concerned about than passport bros. I'm seeing 14-year-old young men that are not thinking about girls at all. And no, I don't mean they're gay. I don't mean they just don't care. Whether it's video games or whether it's going to school or getting a job around. I mean, what I'm amazed at, because I think about, the guys I ran with when we were 12, 13, and 14, we were chasing anything we could find related to girls. These young men are in a whole different place. Even my own son will be so indifferent to, the whole idea, not indifferent to a person, indifferent to the very idea of relationship. He is so not bothered. They're not thinking about it. It's a whole different dynamic. And when you really get to the core of it and start talking to these young men, which I've had a chance to do, what you find is they're responding to having witnessed their parents, witnessed the relationships elders have had. They've seen the trauma, they've seen the difficulty, they've seen the tension, the arguments, and they've just been like, it's not worth my time. You know what I mean? And I'm seeing this kind of pullback from the youth, and I'm saying, you're concerned, and I get why most people are concerned about passport bros, because essentially these are the middle class brothers that women have been claiming that they want for the longest. The only people that can really afford. Black folks really don't travel statistically to any great degree. So the men that can get passports and make it a habit of leaving, those are the men that have the resources that many women claim they want. So I get it. But I'm like, yeah, the sleeping giant, however, is the next 2 generations. And what I'm seeing in these young men is relationship is not prioritized the way I think people would want it to be. These young men are thinking about whole other things. These young men are avoiding argument. They're avoiding tension. I mean, I'm seeing them navigate stuff in ways that I wish my generation figured out back in the 80s and 90s. I really wish. It's a whole different thing, and I really don't think people are going to like what it means on the back end. They're not. I mean, even in high school, I'm looking at how frustrated some of the girls are about the guys' lack of interest. But these guys are actually listening to us. I actually do have 12, 13-year-old people who listen to my channel. I know these young men are talking about Kevin Samuels. They're talking about Andrew Tate. They're talking about all of these various guys on YouTube. But truth be told, I saw them withdrawing before they started listening to a lot of these guys. So I'm just like, look, you're concerned about passport pros, and I get it, but this is bigger than just finding women in other countries. This is an overall rejection of this low boiling contempt and misandry that's become baked into our culture in the West and our culture in African American community, and it's reached I think a fever pitch enough to where it needs to be a public conversation. If nothing else, because the men have already moved in a trajectory, whether we like it or not. So if you want to have that conversation and any hopes of reestablishing something, there needs to be some hurry up, because these young brothers are, man, I'm telling you, a different thing. So, I wouldn't use it if I wasn't a father. I'm just telling you. And it's not just my son. I'm talking about his friends, his associates. Oh man.
You're like, it's like you guys are focused over here. This is the real. This is what we're really going to be dealing with.
That's the real. And trust me when I tell you, the kind of young women that are approaching him, not the women he's going out looking for, the kind that are approaching him are making it a point to bring nothing but peace. And he's 17. And I'm seeing this with his friends. I'm seeing this with their social network. I'm seeing this with the young men that I deal with in my classes every year. The dynamic is changing, and I do not know how many women are paying attention to
it. Real quick, because I have a couple of things I want to add to that, but I want to acknowledge the super chat. Shout out to Dane C. It says, we have to remember the past was a different place. People thought they were superior to others across race and gender. Feminism wasn't all negative. Yeah, I mean, Black men, I think, early on were some of the biggest advocates of feminism, because at the time it was connected to liberation. Now we know it has obviously transformed into something different now, but early on it was in some ways supposed to be for the overall benefit of the Black community. Shout out to Johnny Vega. It says, great guest, great channel, a great time. Thank you for the 10 on the super chat. I appreciate it. I think I saw another one come through. I want to make sure that I acknowledge really quick before I respond. Okay, it says, there, I said it. Shout out to you with the 5. It says, it is divisive because it has to be. This power struggle for leadership of Black community proves the existence of a gynocracy. Thank you again for the 5. And then shout out to Trev Dakeen. It says, peace and blessings to you both. I hope I didn't butcher your name. I'm sorry if I did. But thank you for the 10. So, I will say, I just got on TikTok like a few months ago as a way to kind of engage and figure out what's going on. And I'm like, I guess I should go there. This is where the younger generations are. And I will say, if what these young men have to, the pleasure of dealing with is anything like what I see on TikTok from these lovely ladies, then I am not surprised whatsoever that some of them have just taken hands off, because I'm like, I don't know if it should be the content I engage with and now the algorithm is talking to me, but like the amount of cooning, for lack of a better term, or the amount of like self-loathing, disgusting, degenerate behavior I have seen from other young Black women has been like, who was raising these women? Is like, are they being raised by like neo-Nazis? Like, what is going on? Like, this is literally the stuff that I see. It is so it is so like I feel like it's a joke sometimes. I'll be like, this is not real. Then I'll go and see. Like I saw one video that I actually did a breakdown of a black woman twerking on a cotton plantation.
Oh, I heard about that. I don't think I saw it though.
You don't need to see it. But just stuff like that. And honestly, it was sent to me, and I wanted to overlook it because sometimes I'm like, when things are crazy, like I want to believe that's just that small person over there with like 2 subscribers that nobody watches, that shadow ban. Like I don't need to elevate that. So I wanted that content to be that. I wanted to be that small content creator that has mental issues that nobody follows. So I'm not going to add to it. But then I saw this woman had, I think, like over 5 million followers. And that particular video had like 7 million views. I went in there, and granted, I can't speak for how many bots were there, but I saw an overwhelming amount of women in there laughing, just LOL laughing, like, oh, you're not serious about nothing. Oh wow, like laughing. And I'm like, how are we making fun of the genocide of your own ancestors? And this is and again, I'm like, if this is what these young men are seeing, because I think social media, all in all, is at least certain platforms seem to be overran by women. Not to say women aren't there, but as far as who's posting, it's certainly women are getting attention. I'm like, if that's what I'm seeing, well, of course they're walking. Of course they're like, yeah, I'm gonna focus on my video games.
Well, yeah, just I mean the same thing that young men are seeing in the families that are leading them to where they are, women are seeing, but they're receiving it differently because the kind of socialization they're getting from mothers and grandmothers and aunts is one where this is somehow empowering. So I think it's being received differently, but it's definitely having an impact on the young. So some of the women become more entitled. Some of the men begin to check out and look in other ways, look in other directions. I mean, if anything, masculinity is becoming something, or it has been in the last few years, most especially, but definitely in the last decades, been more and more under attack. So these young men are applauded if they're anything but masculine in any kind of traditional way. And so some of them just kind of raised their hands and said, I can't really do anything with it. And they're looking to find ways to, just be happy in their own lives. So whether it's a politically motivated and orchestrated, kind of walkout, or it's an individual kind of, I'm done, I'm just going to find my own happiness. In some respects, it leads to the same thing for the Black community, which is, you disrespect the men long enough, they begin to check out purposely or, subconsciously. Either way, same impact.
I want to know. I'm certainly not a therapist, but I started seeing one a few months ago, and she had made somehow we got on the topic of race. She's a Black woman, older Black woman who actually doesn't hate Black men. So let me just say that. But we had gotten, I think, on the conversation of race, and she had talked about how what happens with individuals, right, when they have undealt with trauma or whatever, how essentially it stays and follows them in the different way it impacts them, and how sometimes that stuff can be born into their kids, right? She's like, now take the Black community, right, in America that's had centuries of internalized trauma, and then they've had really, arguably only a few decades, depending upon how you look at it, at freedom, and even then it hasn't been totally free. And you're expecting these people who have had all these centuries of trauma to all of a sudden to be healthy when one individual who grew up with the first couple of years of trauma sometimes can spend their entire life trying to undo that. Now you have an entire community that's been traumatized. So, again, she was breaking that down to me. And the reason I thought that was so interesting is because, again, when I look at the behavior, you alluded to something earlier on when you were talking about Black men. And what it sounded to me was, in some ways, Black men being socialized to expect so little. Okay, it's like, what is that saying about overall self-esteem or self-worth, to where someone could call you and say, wow, she gave me coffee, and that be like a thing. And even when I think of the way that, I'm sorry?
A big thing.
A big thing, yes. And even when I look at the way Black women consistently disrespect themselves and then turn around and disrespect other people, I just think back to what she was saying, and it's like, yeah, you don't want to go and harp on things that happened years ago, but also at the same time, it's like we can't overlook some of the things that you mentioned in your Black political agenda. It's like how Black men and the Black family essentially has been impacted on all these levels consistently. You know, education, the prison system, access to jobs, unemployment. It's like you can't remove that from the overall experience that people even have today. And this is why I think sometimes um I will say for myself, and if you have anything to add to this, let me know. I sometimes I can get a little confused or perplexed because in one end out here, there is this conversation about high value Black men and how a lot of Black men now, majority of them are in the middle class and they're doing well in their, some of them are starting to gain wealth, got their passport, do better. So I hear that conversation of like Black men are finally doing well, we're good, things are okay. And then you kind of have the other side where it's just like, no, actually, can we be a little bit more honest? I think in there you talked about, what was it, unemployment? I want to say that you said like, was it 40-50% of them of Black men are unemployed? Or
I think I was talking about homelessness, but I did say in 35 major cities, you had a 40 to 50% unemployment amongst young Black men. But here's the thing, that was pre-pandemic. So how much worse did it get to, during the pandemic and afterwards? What's the legacy of the pandemic on those numbers?
Oh, wow. Okay.
If Black America constitutes half the homeless in the United States, right? And that's pre-pandemic, where is it at now? You know what I mean? And typically, especially in certain urban centers, you can have up to 90% of the homeless being men. So the question is, if these things were that bad before the pandemic, how much worse are they? So I argue that those things are problematic. But the thing is, Black men are doing better and worse despite or in spite of a lack of support. That's what I try to tell people.
Okay.
Depending on it. So if you look at the numbers, Black men are the only group of men that make less than their women when you account for incarceration. But if you focus on employed men, they actually earn more than Black women. So they're doing better and worse in spite of a lack of support. The difference, though, is if you have Black men who are not necessarily heading families to the degree they might have done in past generations, then the question is, all right, where are they taking their resources? Where is it going? If relationships are problematic, stressful, and difficult, and they're checking out, and you have record numbers of men who are going monk, as it were, what's the impact of that? See, those are the kinds of conversations that I think would be good to have, because people want families, people want support. But if you're gonna undermine and disrespect Black men in the course of it, then you got to deal with the fallout of that.
Yeah. Okay. So then, that leads me to another question. But real quick, guys, if you're on here, hit that like button. Be sure to hit the likes. The likes are free. Also, as always, if you'd like to show support to the show, you can find me on CASHAPP or VENMO CHardé, and I'll be sure to acknowledge all super chats. Shout out to you, Jara Clark, with the 5. It says CHardé is all about unity. Thank you. Thank you for the 5. I do appreciate it. And so then, because like I said, this is something I've tried to make sense of. So you're saying Black men, on one end, you have those who are against all odds, doing well, the ones advocating maybe for grabbing your passport, or the ones advocating or pushing for, okay, what does it mean to be a high value man, or what does it mean to advocate for yourself, right? Or to ask for more, to be treated well, and to not settle for less. So you have that side of things. And at the same time, you have Black men who are falling behind because of the systematic. So you're saying like both of these things can be true at once. I want to make sure I understand.
It just depends on what metric you're looking at, and what you're focusing on in that regard. But there's something you raised about sexual marketplace value and this question of high value men. One of the things I wanted to say to it before I forgot about it is this conversation around it was important, most particularly in this last decade, because what I found is there's so many Black men who did not know their worth. Now, you can say, I don't care about worth by Western standards or capitalist standards or material standards, and that's fine. That's what you want. But I'm saying that no matter what the metric you use is to establish value, I don't think Black men have ever been taught that they have value and they have worth. So when you get this conversation about sexual marketplace value, and the standards for what it is, whether it's income, whether it's height, looks, muscularity, fitness, so on and so forth, whatever that standard is, penis length, whatever. Well, now that you have a standard on the board, what I've come to find in my dialogues, and I get I get at least, probably 300 emails a day. I'm getting an echo. I don't know where it's coming from. Anyway, I get 200 to 300 emails and messages a day. More and more men are finding that by the standards that they really never, kind of looked at before, because we've not been told we had value, they actually have value. There's a website I kind of discovered jokingly, and it turned out to be a measure of what men bring to the table and how valuable they are by sexual marketplace standards. Men found themselves in the top, 1% in terms of the Black community, and that's a combination of everything from height to income to all these different standards. Because keep in mind, there's only 4% of the human male population that's over 6'2". So
Oh, wow.
so
Okay.
if you're over 6'2" and you're making anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, you're going to be in a very small percentage of men. But I find more and more men found themselves in, really in these high positions in terms of value. But that's not what we were taught. That's not how we were socialized. We were taught that your job is to serve. She is, of course, the flower. She's the goal. I forget the term they use, but she's the prize. And that's kind of it. Your job is to find a woman and serve her. And damn how she may treat you. So the more and more men I found who had reached their 30s, had been through several relationships already where they really didn't find that they were respected to any great degree, and found that they actually had value by the standards that were being put on the table. These men, for the first time in their lives, started to wonder, well, if I have value, where can I find that value appreciated? This is a process in the last decade or so, I would say, that is somewhat unprecedented. So it's not just limited to whether or not they're middle class by income standards, because that tends to vary. It depends on how you define middle class. If you say it's 30,000, if you say it's 40, what are the specific numbers? But when you look at all of the standards we've heard women say over the last 4 or 5 decades that they value in men, more and more men who are finding themselves undervalued are also finding that they actually meet those standards to a greater degree than they've ever been told. And this is one of the reasons Kevin became so instrumental, because by laying a standard, see this thing, people chastise Kevin for laying out this material as standard, but he only laid out the standard that women articulated over the last 4 or 5 decades, not a standard he made up. He laid out a standard that women articulated they wanted. And the only question he really asked was, well, do you qualify for the men you say you want? But in the midst of initiating that conversation with with women, there were men on the side saying, well, let me look at the standard and where I fit. And the men that found themselves undervalued often found they had more value than they ever thought they did. They just weren't treated appropriately in regard to that. So that in and of itself initiated a whole nother side of the conversation where men were starting to figure out, if I do have value, where can it be appreciated? And why do I expect so little? That's a whole other conversation that men had not been having prior to that.
Why you expect so little is definite. That, like I said, we kind of started with that, based upon this whole question and how your initial response and even your response up to this point to the idea of articulating and writing down and organizing the needs of Black men, and the shock that you've gotten from that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Let's see. Brothers are starting to send in more suggestions for the list. So,
okay.
I'm just.
You talking about? Oh, in the chat?
No. What? Well, no. I was. I've been getting emails this last few days where brothers are finally sending in more. So just going.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's great. The words getting out there, conversations being had. No, that's good. I mean, I think as I hate to say it, but I'm like, men move with actions in their pocketbooks. I think for better, for worse, whether it's too late or it's not too late, eventually the conversation needs to be had. And I think women will be forced to listen whether or not they want to or not.
Which is it's funny how that's a challenging thing, because most men, whether it's in their households or in classrooms from kindergarten through grad school, have sat and listened to some of the most horrendous stuff about them, and have been forced to hear it. And
Mhm.
yet, I used to say this right after Kevin passed. It was like, we could literally sit here and read book after book and watch movie after movie of these kind of feminist, depictions of men and these declarations of what men are and what they're not. But you can't sit through, an hour or two on YouTube. Interesting. Okay. You know, Kevin isn't even required reading in classrooms, the way some of this stuff was for those of us in grad school. And
No.
yet you can't listen to brothers who are articulating with data what their concerns are. So, eh, okay, that tells men quite a bit right there.
Yeah. I wonder, I don't know, it'll be interesting to see what the next 2 years hold. I don't know, that's all I can say, especially, with the elections coming up, the way I don't know, that whole I'm just curious, the whole bucking thing. Um
No.
I I don't know if that was honestly meant to pander to black men and they're so disconnected, or that was specifically for black women and black men were just kind of like the pawn. But I'm like, with things like that being put out in the atmosphere while black men are organizing, albeit maybe behind closed doors, not in those mainstream spaces, but organizing nonetheless, they'll be curious to see what happens.
Yeah, I think in many ways, many of us took it as a kind of smack in the face to black men to fall back in line. Not a
So,
serious
so weird.
engagement with black men at all. Just kind of this backhanded way of saying, you're out of pocket, get back in line, straighten up. And it did not. I don't really think it went very well as far as that. It was
What
not
do you
taken.
what do you think? But I'm like, they're out of pocket. Why? Do you think that was in response to the manosphere? Do you think that was a response to the Kevin Sam? I'm like, what? I'm trying to figure out what could they point to from black men that was telling them they're out of line. Is it because some are openly now saying we don't walk with the Democratic Party? Like, it's hard for me to understand why they felt like that was okay and what would have initiated such a horrible uh ad. That I'm like, anybody who knows any black man like would know that that would be the most horrible way to try to get him to vote.
No, I
Like,
think I think it's a combination of things. They've heard rumblings that they don't quite understand. They don't know why it's happening, and they don't like it. So it's kind of a mixture. It's the Kevins. It's the family debates around Thanksgiving. It's the noise black men are making. It's the push, the switch that some made to vote Republican during the last presidential election. But more than that, it's the men that I think have been pulling out of the process entirely, who are fairly politically astute. They can tell you who's running. They can tell you their issues. Because the popular trope is that black men don't know anything about politics and they're just complete. Some are disconnected, and that even and of itself is like a political step. It's a gesture in response to being ignored. But then you have some that are quite plugged in politically and have abstained from voting because, again, how different is the quality of life for black males under either regime? You know what I mean? So I think this
yeah,
kind of pulling back is scaring the hell out of people who really want as many votes as possible for whatever it is they're pushing, and they're slowly recognizing that black men are either withdrawing or are indifferent and are not responding to the triggers that used to work. You used to be able to say you vote left or the world is going to go to hell if you don't vote for this Democratic
okay,
candidate, and people would run to the polls. I think they're finding that men are just kind of saying, well, what's exactly in this for me?
yeah, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
Rightfully so. Would you say, how would I put this? Um, yeah, it's like men are starting to recognize that a lot of the stuff is just gaslighting, and they're tired of it and they actually want to be seen as respected. Do you think that it is too late for the black community in America, too late for them to come together, or too late for it to be a time where black men are respected by black women and there is a community and there are all policies that are passed that improve and recognize the humanity of black men? Like, do you think it's too late for that, or do you think we'll just continue in the trajectory that is already set?
I How do I put this? I don't think it has to be too late, but in terms of the willingness to meet Black men where they are, I don't really think it's present, most particularly among women. When I look at the last few decades, when I look at the kind of practices that have become commonplace, things like when a lawyer tells a woman in a divorce, accuse your husband of molesting the children to get custody. You have men who are talking about having experienced that, and she gets custody and he gets supervised visits. Those stories are becoming more and more the norm. When you talk about men who are experiencing intimate partner violence and nobody's taking them seriously, and it's gotten to the degree where even if he defends himself from being attacked, he'll sooner go to jail for defending himself,
Yeah.
and she'll be willing to add on to it to make sure he goes to jail, even though she initiated the violence. You know what I mean? And I can go down a list of other kinds of circumstances. When men start to meditate on these types of experiences, it's like the level of and a true apology, first and foremost, is not just a few words. It's not just a video. It's actually changed behavior. If you're
Yeah.
if you're not going to see a genuine apology that's matched with changed behavior, then I would say it's too late. If the people who have been in a position to implement and turn institutions against Black men are willing to own that and do something about it, it doesn't have to be too late, but they might be making it such by being unwilling to do what it takes to unravel what's been happening for this last 60 years, most especially. And again, we can go to different time periods. I kind of fixate on the 60s onward. But even that, and there's kind of a gaslighting that's happening with that, right? Where, I think as men are starting to articulate, what's happened politically and what kinds of things that have shaped the Black community. What we've heard in the last number of years is, no, that's not true. You guys are making this up. But as these apology videos are coming out, I'm starting to hear more and more everyday women saying things like, no, we did choose policy over you. No, we did choose, and they're starting to be more and more articulate about these
About
things.
it.
So now you're getting people admitting to things that we were gaslighted about just about a year ago. So you're hearing this, and it's like, okay, well, clearly there's enough information out there to really have a serious conversation about what's actually taken place this last few decades. But if you're unwilling to acknowledge it, you want to keep gaslighting, you want to keep telling Black men that, this liquid, that's pouring onto their heads is water and not something else, then, maybe it is too late. I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know if that's necessarily men making the decision as to it being too late. I think it's women's responses to men's concern
Men's concern. Okay.
to determine. If the response is disingenuous, that's the answer.
So then, okay, because I know you mentioned apologies. I actually had the opportunity to see. This is a few months ago. It was an apology that you reviewed. I don't remember exactly I don't remember exactly who it was per se.
Was it a Black woman with blondish kind of hair? I think it was.
Yeah, short. I think it was like short hair, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think she had a doctorate. I never heard of her prior to that, but I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, so I did get a chance to watch that live, and I, looked at the response, of some of your different followers, and was just observing. And you made this point, right, that outside of there being changes in action, then the apologies are empty, which I agree, right? True apologies, true repentance, however you put it, is turning around and doing something different. Totally agree there. But I think we started this conversation by saying Black men aren't necessarily asking for a lot, though. They're just asking to be nice. So if, let's just say, just in theory, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but in theory, if there was an initiative from Black women who said, hey, let's just start treating Black men nice. Let's just start trying to listen to them and be nice. Do you think that would be enough? Or are you saying it needs to be that and they need to be coming around and supporting some of these political causes? I don't know. I'm just curious your thoughts on
that. I think it would have been enough a few years ago. I think the conversation has changed. I think Black men are in a slightly different place, and that's one of the reasons I won't say that's one of the reasons there is a political agenda. I think it's one of the reasons that it's being discussed, because it's been around for a couple of years. Nobody really said much about it. I think it's being discussed because it's now reached a point where men are interested in turning their capital, their social capital, their political capital, in a direction where it might change their environment. And so as they're asking those questions, they're looking at what's available. And the Black male political agenda is one of the few things you'll find that unapologetically deals with Black men's political interests, or at least it attempts to. It's not to suggest that everybody's going to like it, that all Black men are going to dig it. You know, there are a number of Black men that hate it. There are a number of Black men that don't see the point of it. But at the end of the day, the reason the conversation is happening is because Black men have reached a point where they're interested in leveraging whatever capital they have on changing their environment, whether it's moving elsewhere or changing the environment we're in here. And so I think that's why it's happening. And, you know, to have a conversation with women about what the community needs, if you're unwilling to engage Black men on that level, or for those that are asking those kind of questions, then yeah, I don't think it's really going to work for that given couple or whatever. But I think that's where the conversation is slowly starting to transition to, just ahead of the next presidential election. You know,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of this has also been, you know, kind of inspired by Karen Bass in Los Angeles and Stacey Abrams in Georgia, where they actually begin to talk about Black men and needing their votes. You know, and you know, so as they started to really publicize how much they needed Black men's votes 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it just would have been another shaming tactic: get out and vote, put her in office. Now you're seeing Black men say, huh, okay, you want my vote?
Yeah.
What do
What
I
you
get?
gonna do for me? Yeah.
And some of us have started to ask the question of, you know, are you really ready for Stacey Abrams or anybody else to look at you and say, well, what do you want? I think, you know, for a lot of us, that would have been a hard question to answer. And and so we're slowly starting to try and have those conversations. Those conversations are going to be rocky. They're going to be unwieldy. It's going to be what it is, because this isn't a conversation we've ever had. Our focus has always been communal, despite accusations of patriarchy and exploitation. If you really listen to the rhetoric of Black men politically since Malcolm X, they've been communal. And I don't before Malcolm, but I just arbitrarily chose Malcolm. They've been communal in orientation.
Okay. Now you would say, so the conversation from men, the expectation from men has been communal. Why women have voted in favor for themselves, because Black women overwhelmingly vote for feminist policy, right? Or would it would that make sense? Or
I think that's been a product of white feminists courting Black women.
okay.
That's one of the things you saw in the late 1960s. White women started to court Black women, Chicano women, Native American women. They, especially by the time you get to second wave feminism, they were really trying to transition this feminism from a middle class white woman thing to a universal sisterhood thing. But it's a universal sister, and I'm not telling you nothing you don't know. It's a universal sisterhood as long as you follow white women's precepts. As long as you know, if you're Black, you're brown, whatever it is, as long as you follow what white women want, you're a part of the sisterhood. If you don't, you're ignored. And you know, within the Black community, you're pick me or whatever it is.
Yeah.
As long
No,
as you
that
stick
went
with
well.
the narrative, that's the feminist leaning. And white women offered baubles. They offered, you know, gifts. If you follow us, there are white collar jobs this way. There's welfare support this way. There's policy that positions you underneath us as white women, but you will get some benefits that you won't get messing around with him. You're Black male. Those kinds of seductive tactics were used, and I think they became part and parcel to Black women's whole worldview about politics. I mean, going back to what I said earlier about the safety net, Black women learned there was a whole new safety net under white feminism, at least in terms of policy. You didn't have to be running out in the street declaring yourself a feminist, because a lot of Black women didn't, but they still learned the talking points, you know, primarily through, you know, ciphers like Oprah Winfrey, where she kind of helped Black women transition into this white feminism with a Black face by kind of pulling from obscure Black feminists and at the same time interacting with middle class and upper class white feminists. Oprah became the focal point where Black women could be initiated kind of into a rhetorical feminism during the 1980s and onward that did not have to be white women burning bras like you saw in the past. It kind of had this air of an aristocratic, you know, kind of middle class aspiring woman who was of the world. She was intelligent. She was this, that kind of air helped transition a lot of Black women into a feminism that they didn't even have to understand to participate with. And as much as they began to internalize those values, it created a larger and larger rift with Black men. Black men became more and more viewed as irrational and domineering, because the standards that were used to determine what a good man was were being more and more influenced by this kind of white feminism that was veiled in blackface. And so as that rift began to open up larger and larger, Black men slowly began to understand that this was not something that you could just pull her back from. I mean, she had benefits. She's getting degrees. She's working white collar jobs, and with that opportunity. And the funny thing about it is, white women still would get married. See, that's the interesting thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And get married, but tell you that they're inspired by Black women who can be independent and strong. So, Black men started, I think, in the last few decades, really began to realize that, against this independent movement, the choice has kind of been made, and it wasn't made by Black men. Black men are only now starting to recognize that there's not much I can do about this choice she's made.
Yeah.
Individual men may be able to do certain things, but as a collective, these are the kind of decisions that have been made.
So very interesting. Real quick, I want to acknowledge a super chat. Shout out to Kevin C with the 60 H&L. It says apologies include admission, remorse, and repair. Couldn't agree more. He's talking about how why soft girl era ain't nobody buying it. Black men aren't buying the soft girl era, and just being nice is not enough. And which is why I wanted to have this conversation, because that's something that came up over the last few weeks, and I was talking to other lovely ladies in the space, and talking about interacting with Black men, the Black community, Black men's best interest, and this idea of treating them nice and supporting them came up, and I was like, this is good. Now what does that look like? How do we actually do that? And again, which is why I think it's really important we listen in.
Well, did you want me to address that directly?
Please
okay.
do.
So if we talk about just family court reform, right, the very first point that Black men put on this agenda, and keep in mind, I didn't write this. The only two things I put on here had to do with Black male specific reparations and the United Nations and a charge for genocide. Genocide of the Black male. Those were things that I initiated in conversation with other brothers, but those were, pushes that I made. The rest of this were points that Black men put in themselves. So the very first thing listed in there is child support, is family court reform, and the first subpoint there, it has more subpoints than any other part of this agenda, is child custody. And so they're talking about, and the very first point under that is 50-50 child custody as a standard, as a given. When two people get divorced, it should be 50-50 custody, unless there's evidence that the one parent is grossly unprepared. You know what I mean? Unless you have evidence of that sort, it should be assumed. I mean, that this is 50-50. That's the first point Black men put on there. The section is that the second part of that needs to be that it's the presumption of law that it be 50-50 custody. After that, brothers are pushing for mandatory paternity testing at birth. Now, this is something that I think is really I saw an article about this a couple years ago, but I can't recall where I saw it. I get the feeling that women, of course, would probably not want that policy enacted.
No, I think that'd be great. I would support that 100%, because
I would too. But I think you're going to end up having to have security called at many a hospital. I'm just saying, it is what it is.
You know what? I wonder if, in my humble opinion, I wonder if that would actually start to encourage women to be a little bit more responsible with their sexual activity. I don't want to go too far down that road, but just saying.
No, that's part of the issue. If there are no repercussions, what's in there to change the incentivized behavior? So if you are going to be there, when the testing takes place, that might hopefully change how some people think about it. But either way, whether it changes how women think about it or not, men are saying before they sign the birth certificate, this should be a given as part of the process, because men are reaching a point where they're tired of being told that regardless of the fact that they're not the biological father, they still have to pay child support because they've signed the birth certificate.
It's crazy.
So again, if you want to have these kind of conversations in regard to, whether or not we're going to have a relationship, these are the kind of critical conversations Black men want to have.
Absolutely.
Because even though it's not mandatory federal policy that there be, DNA testing at birth, if you're having this conversation with a woman and she's agreeing to it, then that means that if we do decide to ever go there, you understand that that's going to be something I want to do before I sign anything. Whereas in a lot of instances, men report, some married men who've had several kids have reported to me that they're hesitant to have these discussions. They want to get cussed out. They don't want her upset. They don't want her using the family court to alienate them from their kids simply because they asked about a DNA test. But as Dennis Sperling pointed out, I'd rather go through that than what she could do if I don't have the test done. But that's a whole nother conversation. So, mandatory DNA testing being one of the kind of standards there, talking about at fault divorce, the impact of no fault divorce on most particularly Black families. There not being any standards for how divorces are initiated, and the degree to which this leaves men with very few resources to do much about that. What we call, and this is something that I had initially called a financial abortion, but shout out to a brother named Hood Conservative. I think on Bernard Riley's show, he suggested a change in the terminology. We refer to it now as a termination of parental obligation. Basically, and this is something even Dave Chappelle has joked about. It's kind of a take on my body, my choice. And if women definitely have and should have a choice over what happens with their bodies, men should have a choice on whether or not they choose to be tied to a situation they may not want to be in. If women have the option to terminate a pregnancy, men should have the option to terminate their ties to that pregnancy. And that should be done early enough to allow even women to decide if they want to follow through on a pregnancy if they know that this man doesn't want to. But the capacity to choose whether or not they want to be involved in a pregnancy. And that's one of the conversations they want to have as far as choice. It really is a matter of choice, because the way it's kind of framed at this point, women have choice, men have obligation, and that obligation she decides on. So the next 18 years of your life is predicated on what she decides to do. So like I just posted a video before the show today from a brother who told me his story and sent it to me. And in that story, he talked about sleep grape. I got used to using this term grape. He woke up with a woman straddling him. And, he said he pushed her off, but it took him a while to recognize what was happening. Yeah.
Whoa.
You can look up sleep grape minus the G. And this is an actual form of violation that men can, anybody can really experience. But men experience it, and it's slightly different for two reasons. One, because many of us know, when you sleep, especially when you get toward the rise of that sun, other things rise as well, and that does not have anything to do with attraction, interest. You are dead knocked out, and things are what they are. But women can take advantage of that, and there are cases. There's case after case where we could talk about that. But the other side of it that becomes difficult is after that event, she may be pregnant. You have no choice as to what happened. So in his story, he talks about pushing her off of him once he got his clarity about what was happening, and then her reaching out to him later to say, I'm pregnant. And so now he is potentially involved in a family court scenario where he may have to pay child support, not only on a child he didn't want, but a child he didn't even consent to having, the sexual act that led to that. Right?
Wait, was he drugged? Or did
he just sleep?
Oh my God.
There's cases of this. I read cases a few years ago. There was a young man in a college dorm. He was in a co-ed dorm. Wow. And there was a neighbor of his a few doors down. He didn't know her. He just, saw her a few times or whatever. And he woke up one morning and she had straddled him and was riding him.
I have never in my, now granted, I don't pretend to be an expert on everything, but it's like I've never in the conversation of Grape have I ever heard anything remotely similar to that.
Oh yeah. There's even a situation where a man had who was married. His wife had left, he had fallen asleep, and he woke up mid-session with who he thought was his wife, who was on top of him. He engaged in the entire act, finished, and then realized it was his sister. It was his wife's sister. It was his sister-in-law.
Oh my God.
His wife had left and she was working. She kind of snuck into his room. He thought he was having sex with his wife. Turned out it's now first and foremost, how many people are even going to believe?
No, ain't nobody believing. No, they're not going to believe him.
They're going to assume he just did that. But now if she got pregnant on top of that, now what?
Oh,
Right.
that's
So it doesn't always have to do with irresponsibility. That's some of the narratives people have, or you're only talking about the termination of parental obligation because these men are not responsible. No, there are a wide variety of situations that go way outside of that, even within married couples. You know what I mean? Where you have fathers or husbands who are talking about their wives are pregnant. They thought it was their child. Turns out it was another person's child. What do you do in those kind of situations? There's all kinds of twists and turns we can look at, but basically, men are suggesting that they should have more choice than they already have. Because right now it's up to a woman and you're kind of subject to her whim with the support of a court. And men are saying that we need to actually have some kind of check and balance against this because as it stands, we have very little.
No, I mean, and that seems fair. I mean, with the advancement of sexual liberation, there should be some equality around that because notice sexual liberation was supposedly all about women, but it's like that's why I'm adamantly opposed to it for multiple reasons. I think it incentivizes bad, dangerous, and destructive behavior, and then it sounds like it also can lead to situations of just gross cases of manipulation. Than men being obliged or obligated to end up in scenarios that they never necessarily signed up for.
No, exactly.
You don't hear those stories.
No, you don't. You don't. Which is why, on top of what's referred to as female stealthing, some of the brothers added that if you have women that purposely sabotage male contraception, or engage in the sex act through some form of manipulation, or not even the sex act. I mean, I think all of us remember what we heard I think was it last year or a few months. I think it was last year from Drake and the hot sauce incident with the condom. I don't know how many people remember that, but he apparently the story was he had sex with a woman, and he had kind of tied up the condom, and before he threw it away, he put hot sauce in it. And so, to my understanding, the woman he was with went and found it and put the results of it inside and began to feel the burn, as it were. What she was actually doing was a form of stealthing. She was trying to get hold of his semen. And I mean, because if she can get pregnant by Drake.
I don't think. Oh my God.
I don't know how true it is, but that's the story. He poured hot sauce in the semen in the condom, and she got hold of the condom and tried to impregnate herself with it. And so now that's an extreme example, but that's a form of female stealthing, right? And so men are suggesting there needs to be criminal charges when women are doing these kinds of things to purposely get pregnant and are willing to do it at your expense. But that's those are the kinds of issues. See, this in essence, these are the kinds of conversations men are having with each other really for the first time about what kind of protections do I need if it goes beyond what's reasonable. You know what I mean? If an individual man is acting reasonably, and I still have no protections on what may happen beyond that, what kind of protection can I push for that might be useful for me, right? So, those are the kinds of issues we're looking at. Some men are pushing them. We're still talking about the family court reform. So they're talking about instituting a system where goods, services, and time spent with a child should be calculated and valued at a dollar amount. And this is because you have a good number of men who are very participatory in their children's lives, but don't necessarily have means. I think Greg Pate, I think is a professor of sociology, at one point pointed out there's over 170 billion owed in child support, and the majority of which, I think it was 70% of which, is owed by men that make less than 10,000 a month. So, in lieu of cash that many men don't have, but if they're active parents who spend a great deal of time with their children, are they able to have that time spent, those kind of non-traditional resources extended? Can that somehow be serve in the place of just raw cash? Excuse me, it was 115 billion, and 70% of that owed by Americans who earn less than 10,000 a year. Right? So that's according to David J. Pate, associate professor of social work at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. Right. So having these kinds of non-traditional approaches to compensate for what, many men can't afford in terms of raw cash. They talk about capping child support in some kind of ways. They talk about holding women accountable for how child support is spent. We don't yet
Yeah.
know how much of this can be enacted and how, but for right now, it's just about getting out and writing it down so we can actually look at it and really assess the spirit of what's being pushed for and how that can be navigated. You know what I mean? Those are the kinds of questions that men are asking. And these are the kind of conversations we're trying to have to get at what it is we really are interested in. So,
Yeah. Again, to your point, creating precautions and ensuring that Black men are treated well and equally, especially in situations where they might be vulnerable or taken advantage of from women in their lives or systems that disproportionately favor women. And
mhm.
yeah, like I said, I read over everything and I thought I didn't see anything to me that seemed outlandish. Now, I actually did have a question of, if you wouldn't mind expounding a
Good.
little more briefly about, because I have heard different people talk about, especially in the YouTube space, I've heard different men talk about no fault divorce and how that impacts men. But I guess I'm kind of curious, how is it exactly? Is it because the courts tend to rule in favor of women getting more alimony, or how is it that Black men are disproportionately taken advantage of economically or in just in general when it comes to no fault divorce? That's, I think, it's a little bit unclear to me.
Yeah, that's kind of the crux of it. I mean, for the most part, what it's become, in general, is that no fault divorce at its core just basically had to do with no one having to prove that someone did anything wrong to have a
Okay.
divorce. I mean, you can get a divorce for any reason,
Yeah.
and that's kind of it. But when that door opened, what a lot of people didn't anticipate is how this would adversely impact men, most particularly Black men, who
Mm.
tended to be at the lower end of the income scale. This had a devastating impact when you tied it in to child support, to spousal support. This ended up making divorce in and of itself almost like a lever to be pulled that left men in a worse off financial position as almost a default position. Right. I
Okay.
don't know how else to really say that. It turned divorce into this kind of cycle of steps that would take place that it invariably put men in an even more vulnerable financial position and really made men kind of push away from marriage. A lot of people don't understand Black
Mm.
men pulled away from marriage more than any other demographic and before any other demographic, going back to the mid 1960s, which kind of presupposed no fault divorce and whatnot. But it got worse afterwards, and Black men were the first to kind of pull away because we didn't have much to lose. I mean, how do I? If you have $1 million and you got to lose half of it, that's going to be annoying. That's going to be frustrating. If you got 10,000 a year and you got to lose half of it,
Mm.
you might have to go to jail for what comes afterwards. So it's such that men began to pull away because of how easily divorce in family courts, feminist leaning family courts, became a kind of no check and balance process where women could kind of exact resources out of men with not much reflection. There were no advocates that made sure that these situations were balanced, that took into account men's situations, men's exact state of resources. I know we say that supposedly happens, but in many ways it doesn't. And so men are looking for some kind of means where there's some protections in the law that provide some protection against the arbitrary kind of fleecing of men just as a matter of fact process. Um, I mean, now many of these things again were introduced by brothers who've gone through this. I've never gone through a divorce. I'm not proclaiming to know everything about it. That's why I asked that those contribute actually write about
Yeah.
why they're contributing, what the points are, because I don't claim to know all about it. I've heard stories. I've done some amount of reading, but these were ideas that came from Black men who've gone through this, right? And so that's kind of what that was.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And again, I appreciate you coming on and explaining this to me, because you mentioned before these conversations are so crucial and so important, especially for women out there or people out there who are, well, Black women, right, who are complaining or talking about, well, where are the men? Why aren't we marrying us? It's interesting that you say that Black men are the ones who had turned away more from marriages, because I think more recently I'd had a conversation with Obsidian last week or two on my panel, and he talked about how Black men, when polled, I still showed that they were more interested in marrying more than Black women.
Well,
So
yeah, there's a difference between interest and following through. The
following
realities
through.
of, I mean, I think there are many men that would like to be, which is in some respects, you have
Okay.
some passport bros that are really looking for wives in other countries. I mean, I think the popular trope is that they're looking for, just quick and easy fun, and some are, but some are actually looking for wives. They're not playing. I think many men would like to be married. It just marriage became too dangerous, a prospect for many men. And I think that's what initiated the pullback. It was more of a practical consideration.
So that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but so it's like the risk associated with marriage combined with the fact that there doesn't seem to be a ton of incentive to marry, I'm assuming is
There are
why.
not many,
Yeah.
yeah, there are not many incentives, and there are not many protections once a divorce is initiated. So all of that on a practice, so romantically, emotionally, even in terms of just wanting to have kids, there are many men that would love to do that. But if there are no protections and there's no incentives except for what benefits her, on a practical level, men tend to have to look at the cold hard reality. And I think Chris Rock joked about this. It's the
Yeah.
difference between me being alone and me living in my mother's garage because she's not happy.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
I can handle being alone, and I handle 10 years of trying to get back on my feet over something that statistically was doomed to fail. I mean, these are the kinds of practical questions that many men are asking themselves,
Yeah.
and it's not. And I'm not saying they're happy about it. There are plenty of men that are walking away slowly, but it is what it is.
Right. And it's not, yeah, it's not like good news, but at least if you can have the conversation and there's a willingness to listen and engage and try to change things, then it's like, hey, we might actually be onto something. You
Yeah.
made an earlier point though, where it's like, are there enough people out there? Are there enough women out there who want to listen? That's the question. I also wonder, I don't know if you've seen this, but I also wonder, back to your earlier point, if you had non-Black women who were showing interest in Black male studies and Black male interest, I wonder if you would start to see more support from those women as far as the Black political agenda as well. If you see that shift, and that would be that'd be like, I don't know.
Like I said, the conversation is really kind of just starting. I mean, like I said, we've had this up for a while. We're just starting to hear back, and right now it's more the rumblings from other Black men that
Okay.
I'm hearing more than any other groups of women.
Okay.
But as it starts to ramp up, I hear more and more people saying the same things you do. Like, well, that kind of makes sense. I mean, it's not, we'll see if it's ever, actually applied, in terms of policy, but the idea of it makes sense. I mean, one professor I ran across said he read through it and he thought these things were already legal. He said he read through and he thought, well, they make sense. I guess they're legal. And somebody had to tell him, no, this is not,
They're
this
not
doesn't,
legal yet.
not legal, but these are ideas that Black men have. But the point in me saying that is he was like, yeah, this is exactly the kind of thing that, my father, myself, my son, we could all use.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Real quick, I want to acknowledge Better Youth with the 10. It says, Dr. T, I think this point should be added. Black men and child support should be able to claim their children on their tax returns. The tax credit should be automatically split between the two parents. Don't you have an addendum in there or a section where you speak to, um, child support and that being included as far as the tax write-off?
If you go into family court reform, which is the first
Yeah.
major point, you go to point K. There are 5 different parts of point K that speak to nothing but tax filing issues in regard to family court reform. This is something Black men are writing about from direct experience. They're talking about, the use of a third party. In other words, mothers who are basically selling their children's IDs, so to speak, to be,
Crazy.
for people to claim on their taxes. They're talking about welfare benefits and incentives for women that they don't get in regard to taxes. They're talking about child support being considered earned income. All of these kind of things Black men are writing about and saying, hey, there needs to be a better response to these things, because so in terms of taxes, this is happening on the back end, right? So they're already dealing with paying more than they can often afford. They're already dealing with questions about how these monies are being spent. They're already dealing with all of this. But then you get to tax season, and there's a whole nother level of fleecing that they're not able to benefit from, even though they have children too, and they're paying for these children, but they're not able to participate in the tax benefits. So
Okay.
I would suggest that Malk, I guess it is Malk Smith, look through it, and if you don't see the specifics in your point represented, suggest something.
Oh, that was actually better you, but that's all good because Mouse has some
Oh,
some
no,
points too.
better you.
You guys, side note, so I have the link to the political agenda linked in this description box, also on the community tab, so you guys can go check it out and leave your questions, comments. It sounds like you're taking feedback, Dr. Johnson, if people have different things they want to add to it.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, you just keep it respectful and bring it, and let's deal with it. Because at the end of the day, I'm not professing to have all the answers. I don't have a tie-in with Biden or whoever the next president is going to be, that they're just going to enact this because I flipped a switch and made something happen. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying, look, at the first stage of the process is actually finding out what it is Black men want. Then the next stage for that process is refining these concepts and figuring out how they can be applied politically, and who we can leverage, what we can leverage, what situations and opportunities we can leverage. This is something BGS and I talked about the other night. We were saying, look, we got all kind of brothers in here who are lawyers. Some are architects. Some are, running banks. Some have their own businesses. Some are, doing all kinds of things, driving trucks and, sales. They're doing all kinds of things. But if you can have what do we call it? What was he? A consultant, a styles consultant, change the world via Kevin Samuels. Then what the hell can a collective of brothers who do all kind of things do together? This is not a question of what I can enact by myself. It's a question of what we can enact using the resources at hand, because it's unpredictable in terms of what we can bring. I met Kevin, before he had his ascendance on YouTube. If you asked me who was going to ascend out of YouTube, I don't know if I could have picked somebody, but I probably wouldn't have thought it would have been Kevin, but it was. And since it could be, then what the hell else can we do as a collective? That's the question on the table. Are you going to wait for me to do it, or are we going to attempt to do it? But I'll tell you this, no matter what else happens, even if everybody stops talking about this thing today, whenever Black men start to talk about policy again in the future, they at least have something to stand on. When we put this list together in 2020, we have not found a list of politically proposed ideas for Black men anywhere else. Anywhere. So
yeah, so this is like you're like, this is literally just step one, but there's also now so much opportunity, because if you can articulate these things, especially amongst men who have access and influence on really different stages of society, then that could really mean for some good positive changes for the lives of.
When Stacey Abrams said she put together a Black men's agenda, I didn't agree with what was on it. But if there's only one Black male political agenda that is publicly accessible that we've been able to find, and she put together a Black men's agenda a month or two ago, do you really believe she didn't at least look at these? If you put in Black male agenda, there's only really one, especially
right. Yeah.
So do you not believe that Stacey Abrams, her camp didn't see this?
Okay.
So here we are 2 years into it, and you have a major, figure that everybody's at least aware of on one level or another, who had to engage this. Black women electoral, politicians are recognizing they need Black male votes. They're not the only ones. If that's happening just at this stage of it, what else can happen?
Very powerful. It's very powerful. Really quick, so I do want to acknowledge Malk Smith with the 1999. It says, Dr. Johnson stays on point. Help me get it together, brother. Great conversation. Respect first. Niceties will follow. Yeah, that's real. I think it's going back to the soft girl era. And then shout out to you. I think I saw another 20 come through with Archie Rowe. It says, happy to support more of these type of conversations. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Thank you for your generosity on the Cash App. Actually, I did, I'm on the super chat, and I did see one more Cash App come through. I want to make sure I acknowledge from, I think, Mark Jones with the 5. I appreciate it. Thank you guys. And this is, I mean, this has been such a powerful conversation. I've learned so much, and the different things you've mentioned. Some of it, some of the stuff going on in the Black community is obviously very disturbing, but I also think it's really good that we're having conversations. And even to your earlier point about Stacey Abrams being put in a position to have to start to acknowledge, at the very least, the importance of Black men and their prominence in politics, I think is very positive, and I think that could lead to some really, really good change. So I'm really excited to see where this goes, and hope to see more of this. Hope to see more of these conversations. Hope to see more people engaging, and hopefully can see more Black men and Black women coming and acknowledging that it's about time we talk about this different stuff that could and would lead men to want to step away from marriage, that could and would lead men to want to kind of go monk mode. We have to ask ourselves why and be willing to engage,
Yeah. I appreciate you having me up. Appreciate the invitation. I mean, obviously, we only covered a fraction of it, but I would urge people to read through it, check it out, make proposals. All I ask when you make a proposal is that you send in the basic idea. You get explain within 1 to 5 sentences what the rationale is, why it's important, why you're proposing the solution, and what, of course, the solution is, and try to add in a couple links that give some further information on your topic. This is not something that I'm trying to have written for political insiders. This is accessible to everyday people who are going to come up with ideas that come out of their lived experiences.
Absolutely. And I did, if you wouldn't mind, I did want to ask you one more question that I think kind of connects to this Black men political agenda and different conversations I've been seeing around relationships. It's around this idea of a Black patriarchy, which I think you and I both know has never really been in existence, right? In America, it just doesn't really exist. But something I've heard among Black women is, well, really them talk out of both sides of their mouth, right? Complain about the fact that Black men are not in the position of white men for obvious reasons, the reasons that you've listed literally within the political agenda. So complain about that. And at the same time want to still have their rights and be respected, but also want men to build. And so I actually I was in somewhat of a debate a few weeks ago, and there was these women who were complaining about this stuff, and I was like, basically, you're asking for a Black male patriarchy. They didn't admit it, but that's what they were asking for. And then I followed that up with a week later, and I talked to the lovely Miss Courtney Michelle, and I asked her because she was explaining different things, and I was like, okay, so you're asking for a Black male patriarchy? And she said, yeah. She's like, yeah, like we need a Black male patriarchy. So, in your opinion, do Black women, or would the answer to all these policy, things being enacted, if everything went right, would that create a Black male patriarchy? And is that what Black America needs? Does Black America need a Black male patriarchy in order for us to be, saved from the atrocity that is in Black America today and some of the issues that we face? Just curious your thoughts on this whole idea.
In terms of the agenda, I think the agenda is really more of an equalizing measure to get people's foot off our neck, whether it's through federal, state government, or whether it's through the relationships with women who are leveraging these institutions for one reason or another against us. It's really more of a check and balance so that Black men can breathe. I mean, so when I say, I want to know if this child is mine before I sign a birth certificate, that's just a protective measure. That's not necessarily initiating a patriarchy. But I think in terms of what I've heard women talk about, it is funny. Courtney Michelle represents what I would imagine to be a kind of, a small unicorn-like, part of the community where she's saying, yeah, we want a patriarchy. I think for the most part, Black women I hear making complaints about what they want, from protection to financial resources. They are calling for a patriarchy, but they want a conditional patriarchy.
Okay.
Right? They want a conditional patriarchy where they can enjoy the benefits of a traditional relationship, but they don't want to pay into a traditional relationship. So you protect, you provide, you pay the bills, you take out the trash, you make sure that X, Y, and Z are in place. But my involvement is conditional upon my mood and what I feel like in a given moment. And if I don't want to be traditional, I should have the right to be whatever I want to be, and you need to shut up and let me do it. So it's people don't often understand the old ideas about a traditional relationship were always an exchange of resources. Men didn't protect, and that was the end of it. Men protected and women cooperated. That was an exchange of resources and energy, right? Men provided, women. Now in the Black community, both have always worked. That that's the reality of it. So this dynamic where one didn't work, one did. That's
Didn't
the other
exist in
groups.
Black marriage.
We always did, but the way that kind of ended up working out in an ideal relationship was she may work if she chooses to, but if all hell hits the fan, her income is not necessary for the family to thrive. I mean, when I was married, my wife would frequently lose her jobs because she was always sick. She wanted to work because she wanted to work, but she also wanted me to make sure that I had everything covered if she couldn't. And I've tended to find that that's what's expected of Black men. But the question is, are women willing to initiate the other side of that traditional dynamic? What I found is most women want the benefits of it, but they want to cherry pick what they extend. And most women can't tell you what they're willing to give men in exchange for these resources. I mean, if anything, protection and provision for Black men, we've been taught and told so much that's what's required. We don't really have a sense of value for it. It's just a given that we've been told that we're supposed to do this. Many of us have never been taught this was always in exchange. And when you get men to a point where they're willing to ask, to tell women, this is what I need in exchange, you'll find that it takes a long time for men, even men in their 40s and 50s, to be able to articulate, look, I will protect and provide, but these are the things I need from you. Many of us don't know how to do that. And I think there are many women that take advantage of the fact that many don't. But that's the kind of exchange that we need to be talking about. Because if women want these kind of traditional resources, you got to pay into them. But that's the only way it works. It's like having a life insurance program. You're not going to get life insurance that doesn't require you to pay into it. It doesn't work that way. You got to pay into it.
So you mean Black men just aren't going to take us as we are?
Well,
as I am isn't going to.
We did. We've done that for a very long time, and it's only recently that Black men got tired of it. But yeah, this was always conceptualized as a one-way thing.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I all I could say is I totally completely agree. Simply because different conversations I've had consistently with women who espouse to be more traditionally minded and more soft girl or whatever. When you kind of get down to the nitty gritty, it sounds oftentimes like they still want both. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want the ability to be traditional on Monday and then modern on Tuesday, but the men always have to be traditional. And it's like, I don't know that it really works like that.
No, yeah, it's certainly not a two-way street. If you want to say, you know what, from here on out, I decide I'm not going to work anymore. I'm just going to kick it at the house with the kids. I mean, there are families that will, a man can do that, but I generally don't find those men are greatly respected in their relationships. So in many ways, even this has been going on since at least the 1970s and 80s. Men have been expected to maintain 1950s standards for their behavior. Women have been able to recreate and do whatever the hell they feel like. So they can work part-time, full-time, not at all, have kids, not have kids, adopt kids. There's so many variations on what women can do, but men have really one or two: work and protect. And if you don't do either one of those, you're no longer a good man, and anything she does is acceptable. If she leaves you, she takes the kids, she divorces you, she has another partner, all of it is acceptable if you don't meet the basic standard of protecting and providing.
So then you would say like gender fluidity is really, well, I don't know if that gets into the gender conversation and sexual orientation.
Gender roles?
Because and I don't know, maybe that's going more into the LGBTQ combo. But when I see this, because it is, love it or hate it, it is certainly growing. And actually, I saw a report. I talked about this a few minutes ago, where it was a report that was looking at the increase of bisexuality among Gen Z. And in that particular study, it showed that Black women, more than any other group of group, man, gender or race, who were more bisexual. They were the most bisexual of all women. They were exponentially more bisexual than Black men, which I found so interesting with all the whole Black men are gay and DL thing. And I'm looking at the numbers, and it's like, it's actually women, based upon that one study. It's women who are engaging more in this sexual freedom thing. And so you were basically talking about how women have had all this fluidity, right, or freedom to kind of explore whatever, and men have kind of been stuck. Yeah. And so that's what I was asking. You're like, even if when it comes to this whole gender fluid thing, and maybe that means one way sexuality, but it sounds like it means the same thing in utility when it comes to expectations.
Well, what's interesting in regard to that is there have been a couple of articles in the last 6 months that have come out by, I guess, what we might call butch lesbians, who are complaining about the same dynamic.
Really?
Yes, they're complaining about the lack of affection. They're complaining about being taken for granted. They're complaining about having to protect and provide in relationships with other women, and they're not being any kind of reciprocation that meets their. It's an interesting dynamic. So even when you have women who are supposedly, replacing men in certain dynamics and acting out what we would call a traditional male role, they're complaining about the same things that men have complained about. So it's interesting to see.
I will say I think I saw like a video or two on TikTok, but I didn't know there was like actual like studies or reports coming out about
it. Just a couple of articles, but I will say that's not my research. So there may be more, not where I go, but I just found it interesting that that even made it out as an article. I was like, wow.
So even women can't handle women.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I don't want to. When butch lesbians start talking about passport girls, it's a different connotation.
Well, it's not uncommon. I've noticed this in Hollywood, how for some reason it seems like a lot of times when I see open black lesbians, like the ones I can think of off the top of my head are majority with white women, like black lesbian actors or actresses or whatever. So. I mean, I don't want to go too much down on that tangent, but I'm like, I wonder if there's something to unpack there. So, well, I didn't know if you had anything else. I know you touched on some of the things in the Black One political agenda, some of the different points, and I think more importantly, what the Black political agenda actually means for the Black community, for Black women, for relationships, what this conversation means. Are there any other points or other things that you would like to address in response to that?
Wait, about what?
Just the Black One political agenda. Any other things that you would like to address in response to that? To wrap these things up, or things you want to call out?
It's in a very nascent stage. This is early on. We're still developing quite a bit. There's a lot of language that still be added, just to kind of fill out, the areas of Black male life and what's really needed. So I urge people to add in suggestions. This is under development. At this point, it's called the 15-point Black male political agenda, but I don't care if it's 300 points. I just want to make sure we have, a better understanding of what it is Black men need. So then we can be able to kind of cultivate a political discussion that goes beyond, what we're used to, and really starts to advocate for Black men, because I've yet to see that happen. And so that's kind of where that goes. And there's a lot of different parts to it that we didn't get a chance to, of course, discuss here, in terms of targeted cancer campaigning. When you look at for cancer for Black men, they're really staggering in many respects. There's a section on HIV that's about to be added. Everything from paternity leave to voter disenfranchisement. With the most recent point added by BGS Ibmore last night was Title VII reform and the impact of Title VII on Black men in particular. So, and from there, the creation of double minority status for Black women and what that's meant for employment for Black men, right? Especially in regard to affirmative action resources. So these are the kinds of conversations we're trying to cultivate, and we're still in the very early stages, So I hope people will participate and help us to develop and grow this, and then from there, we can see where exactly it can be taken. But I don't want Black men to sit back and wait for one person to make it happen. Join in, contribute, and make suggestions. Bring your capital to the discussion, and let's see what we can do as a collective.
So this is a collaborative group effort.
Absolutely.
Is that okay? The title reform, because I had questions under. I think it was what did I have? Was it 6? Like it was 6B, where I saw like licensing 6, and I saw like licensing, law enforcement, proxy, violence, qualified immunity. I think those are some of the different things that I wrote down that I had meant to ask you for a little bit more clarification on.
Licensing and
But
law enforcement. Is that what you're talking about?
yeah, it was under. Let me see. It was under 6. Oh gosh, I'd have to go pull it up exactly because I wrote
licensing
down
law enforcement was about law enforcement professionals having a revocable license that can be permanently stripped
Oh,
to
okay.
keep them out of profession. So doctors have to be
That makes
licensed.
sense.
And this is something Dennis Sperling has talked about very recently as well. Except
Okay.
he talked about it in terms of, I think it was. Let me see. It's almost. He talked about in terms of liability insurance licensing. But either way, if police officers have to maintain a license that somewhat like a credit score carries with them no matter where they go, their quality of work as police officers, just like doctors, if you have doctors with extremely low ratings because of, kind of things they've done, can we apply that same standard to police officers? So if they have a record of being arbitrarily violent and abusive, particularly to Black men, and this becomes something that, that carries on in their career, and they have to be hired in accordance with the status of their license, and we begin to, use that as a way to kind of weed out police officers that, are misusing their position.
Okay, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then for proxy violence, that's like a short sentence. I just didn't know exactly what that means. It says recognition of proxy violence is a criminal offense.
Yeah, proxy violence basically has to do with using others to initiate violence on your behalf. That's essentially what that comes down to. So, one of the things we talk about when we talk about intimate partner violence, for example, we tend to talk about, a man and a woman getting into a conflict. That's intimate partner violence as we understand it. What happens when she actually goes to get another person or another group to operate on her behalf against the man she's upset with? You know what I mean? Like if you look at Warren Farrell's work back in the 1980s, he kind of talked about this where working class women would use sex to manipulate other men to, violently oppose or sometimes even kill their husbands if it was a life insurance fraud kind of issue, or wealthier women would hire assassins. But the point he was getting at is when women would go get others to operate on their behalf, you know what I mean? So when that happens, then a man, it really, the way it's regarded in the law is one man attacked another man. You know what I mean? Whether it led to death, where it led to violence, one man may go to jail, one man may die, but unless she's directly implicated in this, which rarely happens, she can initiate these all days and there's no repercussion for her. And so that's what proxy violence has to do with. If she's getting people to operate on her behalf, including her in the punishment that goes on, because she's initiated this situation. And this is something that girls learn to do at a young age. I mean, I remember in elementary school, you'd hear girls, "I'm gonna go get my big brother. I'm gonna go get." It's
that's true. Yeah, that's true. That's so true.
But if it leads to loss of life, and as far as the law is concerned, it's just one person, one man attacking another. We don't get at the heart of the problem.
Okay, and then qualified. The last one, I'm sorry, I had was like qualified immunity.
So often negotiated into union contracts, qualified immunity is a legal principle that grants government officials, especially law enforcement, performing discretionary functions immunity from civil suits, unless the plaintiff shows that the official violated clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. In other words, when you have, say, law enforcement who are, quote unquote, doing their jobs, regardless of what they do, they're often offered immunity from civil suits. And so ending qualified immunity makes them culpable, makes them vulnerable to civil suits. So again, if they're abusing their position, they can be dealt with from another kind of angle. But, the kind of protections many police officers have at this point, they're kind of, they're protected from accountability. And again, if we're talking about Black men, protections from law enforcement are part of the discussion.
Okay, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, guys, definitely go and check it out if you haven't already. And as he mentioned, this is very much a community-funded grassroots work. So if you guys have things that you want to add, or feel it's necessary to add, respectfully get in contact with him and send over your information or send over your points.
Yeah, I appreciate that, so, and I appreciate the discussion, thank you for inviting me up.
No, this is great. It's always a pleasure to have you on. I always learn so much, and it's always so enjoyable. So thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you said you have a lot of stuff happening at school, midterms and all that, but thank you for hanging out and, just dropping knowledge and letting us know what's going on. And guys, definitely, if you haven't, be sure to check it out, also share it with somebody, share the agenda with other men in your family, friends, people that you know, so that you can start to have these conversations.
Absolutely.
So thank you again. This has been an amazing discussion, and yeah, have a good night. Don't work too hard.
You too. Have a good one.
Okay, you take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
So guys, this has been great. For those of you who were on, definitely no worries. You can go and check out the timestamps. I'm gonna go try to timestamps once I wrap this up. But again, we started this whole discussion. I really think a few weeks ago, this whole topic of Black men's best interest came up. And while I think it's been good and I think it's been productive to have these conversations, especially as it pertains to the relationship space, the dating and mating space. There is this whole debate over whether Black men should SYSBM, grab their passport, whether or not they should say they're community Black men and stay here and work with Black American women to try to build the community. So I think it's good to have those conversations. But, again, my hope was to really try to sit down and actually understand what the best interests of Black men are. I can sit here and try to tell you all day, every day, and talk about trying to be feminine and being a soft girl, and Black women talk about how we should start to respect our men. I think that's great to say that. But we're getting to a point where we actually need to listen and understand what their interests are. So that's what this conversation was about. I had a chance to talk to Dr. Hasan Johnson, who has worked, I think, in collaboration with like over 30,000 men, I think is what it says on the on his on the agenda, or a lot of you guys, right? Just the Black male community, and essentially come up with interest and come up with this agenda on, hey, here are the different things that we need to happen in order to be able to progress and move forward. So I think it's incredibly important, especially for those pick-me's out there, especially for those Black women out there who do want to work with their men, who do want to try to find ways to engage more healthy with their men, or just to understand what's going on. It's important not only that we listen, but that we start to understand and acknowledge and see the ways that Black men not only have been negatively impacted, but the different ways that things can be addressed, the different ways we can support them. We talked about being nice is okay, but it's not just about being nice. There has to be action to some of this. So hopefully we can continue with these kinds of conversations and discussions, and hopefully we can really start to see more change. I think personally, if Black women are serious, it is going to take more than just being nice. Now, maybe, in the individual life, in an individual circumstance, being nice will go a long way. And maybe, getting a man that will be willing to work with you and vice versa, that'll go a long way. But as far as if there is to be a collective shift, as far as if there is to be a dramatic change in the way things are going right now, it's going to require more than just software error. It's going to require more than just being nice. It's going to require more than just doing our hair and makeup and trying to sit and be pretty. There's going to actually have to be a real desire to understand what men are going through and a desire to try to learn and helpfully support some change. So again, if you missed things, no worries. You can go back and catch the replay. I'm going to add the timestamps. Also, be sure to go and check out the Black Male Political Agenda. Read it through. There's 15 points. It's not like a crazy long read, so it shouldn't take you that much time or time. And be sure to go check out Dr. Hasan's channel. He has amazing content related to some of the different issues and things that uniquely impact Black women, which I think, again, is incredibly important for ladies who say that they do want to learn how to get along. I do want to acknowledge a few of these super chats. Shout out to you, Gamer Life 22 with the $20 on the super chat. I see I'm coming in late, but I wanted to make sure for this second collaboration. Thank you. I appreciate it. I think I saw another one come through too. Same. It says Gamer Life 22. It says I donated for this collaboration. I missed a word in the last super chat. Thank you. Wait, did I get that twice? Okay. Yeah, I think and was there another one? I want to make sure that I didn't miss any of you guys. Okay, and then Chris with the 1999 on the super chat. It says great conversation. Thank you. I have, it's always a good time when I'm able to collaborate with him. I always take so much notes because he has a wealth of knowledge. So this has been fun, guys. Again, if you haven't already, hit the like button and share this with someone that you think may find it interesting. Share it, tag people on it, and let's get the word out there. I'm so excited to be having these conversations, and I'm excited to see where this stuff goes. So thank you for being with me. If you haven't already, like I said, like the video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't, or hit the notification bell so you are notified each time a video goes live, and you're notified each time I go live. And thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you guys for bearing with me. I know this is kind of a longer one, but I think it was very, very necessary, and I learned so much, and I hope you did too. So yeah, I think without further ado, I'm going to wrap this one up and then go have a late dinner. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out, and we will talk later, guys. Okay, bye.